On August 5, 2023, Leo Quinton ascended into the vast, indifferent sky, his destination Texas, his spirit buoyant with a singular, cherished ambition. Clutched in his hand, a gleaming ring, its solitaire diamond catching the subtle cabin light, felt like a tiny, potent star, a tangible symbol of the boundless hope and profound love he carried for the woman awaiting him. He had meticulously planned this moment, envisioning her delighted gasp and the joyful tears that would accompany his heartfelt proposal, ready to etch an unforgettable memory into their shared future. Yet, as the familiar, polished oak door to her unassuming home eventually swung inward, releasing a faint whisper of lemon and rose into the humid Texan air, the scene that greeted him was not the tender, adoring gaze of the partner he yearned to spend his existence with. Instead, it was the stark, undeniable embodiment of a crushing, painful truth, a brutal betrayal that ripped through the very fabric of his unsuspecting world. In that catastrophic instant, every cherished belief, every shared dream, every promise of a life together, shattered into irreparable fragments, and from the desolate ruins of his trust, a chilling, irreversible trajectory toward vengeance was violently forged. This harrowing chronicle delves into the abyssal depths of how a singular, devastating act of betrayal can irrevocably dismantle a man's very essence, compelling him toward a transgression whose dark, echoing reverberations would forever haunt every soul entangled within its tragic, convoluted wake. To truly grasp the devastating ripple effects of such a profound event, to comprehend the intricate web of motivations, the fears, and the desperate, conflicting emotions, it becomes paramount to illuminate the very individuals who found themselves inextricably bound to this unfolding catastrophe. With this imperative understanding, our journey into the heart of this tumultuous narrative begins, drawing our focus now to the man at its epicenter, Leo Quinton. Born in the year 1985 amidst the formidable, industrious landscape of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a city whose steel-forged spirit seemed to imbue its residents with an inherent tenacity, Leo Quinton emerged with an intrinsic drive, an almost palpable sense of ambition that effortlessly distinguished him from the common throngs of his peers. He was far more than a mere face in the crowd. He possessed an acute intellect, an indefatigable diligence in all his pursuits, and a naturally radiant, magnetic personality that drew others into his orbit like iron filings to a powerful magnet. From his earliest academic endeavors, Leo shone as an undisputed natural leader, effortlessly navigating scholastic challenges and always finding himself at the forefront of group projects and discussions. His genuine passion for the thunderous camaraderie of the football field was where his fiercely competitive spirit truly ignited, transforming every game into a personal quest for victory, a testament to his unyielding resolve and strategic thinking. His entrance into any given space, whether a bustling classroom or a lively social gathering, was invariably marked by an immediate, indelible impression, leaving a lingering warmth in his wake. With his striking good looks, an almost tangible sense of unwavering purpose that guided his every action, and an authentic, disarming charm that seemed to melt away initial reservations, Leo presented an image of someone who had already deciphered life's intricate puzzles and knew precisely where he was headed. He was universally well regarded, and that admiration was reciprocated with an open heart and genuine interest in those around him. Known throughout his circles for his unwavering loyalty, his singular, laser-like focus on his objectives, and an affable, easygoing demeanor, he cultivated friendships with effortless grace, becoming a trusted confidant and companion to many who admired his steadfast nature. Yet beneath this seemingly perfect veneer of affability and success, Leo harbored an internal architecture of deeply ingrained convictions and unspoken limits, a set of principles that were non-negotiable for him. These weren't mere preferences. They were deeply rooted boundaries, firm lines he drew in the shifting sands of his personal life, boundaries that would, with an almost prophetic certainty, profoundly sculpt his future choices and ultimately, the very trajectory of his destiny. Paramount among these deeply held tenets was a steadfast and unyielding aversion to embarking on romantic relationships with single mothers, a conviction so absolute it promised to cast a long, complex shadow over his pursuit of love and happiness. While the broader tapestry of society often reveres a strong, devoted mother as an embodiment of indomitable resilience, A beacon of unconditional love and unwavering strength, Leo's own formative experiences had unfortunately imparted a starkly contrasting and deeply unsettling lesson. These indelible imprints from his past, etched into the very core of his being over years of subtle accumulation, would inevitably tint the lens through which he perceived and engaged with every subsequent relationship, casting a long, intricate shadow over his romantic inclinations. It was during his college years, amidst the vibrant intellectual ferment and burgeoning social scene of higher education, that Leo first encountered a single mother whose very existence would profoundly challenge the rigidly defined boundaries of his personal philosophy. Her name was Matilda, a woman whose captivating presence first drew his attention at a boisterous campus party during his sophomore year, a semester typically characterized by a heightened sense of self-discovery and the forging of new connections. Matilda was, in his initial assessment, a veritable vision, strikingly beautiful, possessing a sharp, incisive intellect that matched his own, and she seemed to embody every desirable trait he meticulously sought in a romantic partner. Yet, Matilda carried a crucial distinction, a fundamental difference that set her apart from the other women he had encountered. She was already a mother, a guardian to a bright-eyed, 3-year-old boy. And while Leo, in the nascent stages of their intoxicating connection, found himself surprisingly willing to tentatively set aside his long-held aversion, to make an exception for her undeniable allure, this critical detail would, with an almost agonizing inevitability, transform into an emotional burden, a weight too heavy for his carefully constructed resolve to sustain. In the beginning, their burgeoning romance unfolded with a captivating warmth and an almost effortless engagement. Their initial dates stretched into hours of profound, soul-searching conversations, punctuated by shared laughter and intimate disclosures. Leo found himself drawn ever deeper into her world, his emotional investment growing exponentially with each passing day. He genuinely admired her profound dedication to her son, observing with a mixture of respect and nascent affection the tireless efforts she poured into nurturing the young boy. Despite the deeply ingrained reservations, despite the fact that Leo had never once envisioned himself becoming entangled with someone who already had a child, he made a conscious, albeit difficult, decision to embrace the situation. He resolved to make it work, to bridge the chasm between his ideals and the compelling reality of Matilda, hoping that the sheer force of his burgeoning affection could reshape his long-standing convictions. As the tendrils of their relationship deepened and intertwined, Leo, driven by an instinct to nurture and provide, instinctively began to shoulder the increasing financial burden that often accompanied Matilda's life as a single parent. He quietly started picking up the slack, his generous gestures extending to covering her monthly rent, diligently settling her utility bills, and offering immediate assistance with any other necessity that arose. His motivation was clear, rooted in a deeply ingrained belief. Leo aspired to be the steadfast, dependable man who could alleviate her daily struggles, who would meticulously care for her, convinced that if he poured enough effort, resources, and unwavering devotion into their bond, she would reciprocate with an equally profound loyalty and an enduring love. He sought to prove his worth, not just as a lover, but as a pillar of support. However, as the moon waxed and waned through several cycles, transforming weeks into months, the initial rosy glow of their romance began to subtly fade, revealing faint, disconcerting fissures in the foundation of their connection. Leo, eager for her company, would frequently reach out, his voice filled with an eagerness to share moments and create memories. Yet, his invitations were often met with the same polite yet firm refusal. Matilda would explain that she was simply too engrossed in caring for her son, her duties as a mother taking precedence over their planned rendezvous. On other occasions, carefully laid plans would unravel at the last minute, with Matilda citing her son's urgent need for her undivided attention. These repeated cancellations, delivered with a calm certainty, left Leo in a state of quiet contemplation, a gnawing uncertainty creeping into his thoughts. He found himself questioning if this constant deferral was an inherent, unavoidable aspect of being romantically involved with a woman who already had a child, or if it hinted at something more profound. He remained steadfastly patient, clinging to the hope that, with the passage of more time, the imbalance would naturally rectify itself, that their lives would somehow converge into a harmonious rhythm. Perhaps he optimistically believed that his consistent efforts would eventually lead to an equitable exchange of time and affection, yet, with each passing week, that elusive equilibrium never materialized. Then, one particularly quiet evening, the deceptive calm was shattered by the jarring ring of his phone. On the other end was a close friend, their voice laced with a mixture of discomfort and urgency, relaying an unsettling sighting: Matilda, in the company of another man, a stranger whose face held no recognition in Leo's memory. A cold dread, subtle at first, began to seep into his veins. His initial, reflexive response was to dismiss the claim, to rationalize it as a simple misunderstanding, a trick of the light or a case of mistaken identity, desperately trying to protect the fragile edifice of his beliefs. Yet the more Leo, consumed by a gnawing suspicion, delved into the unsettling revelation, the more layers of deceit he meticulously uncovered. The initial, jarring report from his friend was not an isolated incident. It was merely a single thread in a much larger, more intricate tapestry of deception. Matilda, it became devastatingly clear, wasn't merely involved with one additional man. She was actively, and cunningly, cultivating relationships with two others, skillfully juggling their affections and resources. Leo, in a brutal flash of self-awareness, realized he had been nothing more than a naive pawn, the unwitting fool, in her elaborate game. He had poured his heart, his financial stability, and his trust into a woman who not only lacked genuine commitment but had ruthlessly exploited his generosity, viewing him as a convenient ATM rather than a cherished partner. He was just another face in a revolving door of men, each unknowingly funding her lifestyle, each left believing he was special, yet all equally duped by her practiced charm. This profound betrayal wasn't just a wound, it was an emotional cataclysm that utterly shattered Leo's perception of love and trust. The woman to whom he had unreservedly offered his emotional and financial entirety had not only spun a web of egregious lies but had unscrupulously leveraged his affection to sustain her precarious lifestyle, all while artfully managing a clandestine roster of other romantic entanglements. The agony of this deception ignited a fierce, smoldering resentment within him, a toxic fire that burned not only against Matilda herself but extended its searing reach to encompass single mothers as a demographic. This wasn't merely an abstract prejudice, it was a deeply personal, visceral reaction to a profound violation of his trust. And it wasn't solely his agonizing personal experience that forged and hardened this bitter conviction. Leo's worldview was further reinforced by countless anecdotal narratives gleaned from his close friends, tales of similar heartbreaks and financial exploitation. He meticulously devoured online forums and articles, immersing himself in the often sensationalized accounts detailing the perceived struggles of single mothers, particularly how they were depicted as frequently relying on a mosaic of men for both emotional succor and crucial financial underpinning. These stories often painted a picture of women who, in his now jaded view, seemed to consistently prioritize their own immediate needs and those of their children above the sincere emotional investments and genuine desires of the men they dated. Each new piece of information, whether real or perceived, served to reinforce the painful lessons etched into his heart, cementing a deep-seated distrust that would prove agonizingly difficult to dislodge. Leo observed, with a growing sense of frustration and disillusionment, the intricate and often precarious tightrope these women navigated, struggling to meticulously balance the demanding needs of their children with the expectations and requirements of a romantic relationship. In his eyes, their partners invariably seemed to occupy a secondary position, perpetually relegated to a supporting role in a narrative primarily centered around parental duties. This perceived pattern, stark and unyielding, became an undeniable truth in his mind, a recurrent theme he simply could not, and would not, overlook. He grew increasingly vexed by the pervasive notion that single mothers, irrespective of their overt charm, genuine warmth, or seemingly good intentions, inevitably arrived burdened with an insurmountable amount of baggage. This wasn't merely a casual observation, it was a deeply held conviction that began to color his entire approach to romance. From that pivotal, painful moment forward, the very architecture of Leo's perspective on relationships underwent a radical and irreversible transformation. He made an unwavering, solemn vow to himself, a personal decree that echoed with the force of his recent heartbreak. Never again would he knowingly or willingly embark on a romantic journey with a single mother. It mattered not how alluringly attractive they might be, nor how genuinely affectionate or loving they might appear on the surface. The perceived emotional and financial strain, the intricate complexities, and the constant, unspoken competition for attention and primacy that he believed inherently accompanied such relationships, were simply too profound a burden for him to ever contemplate bearing again. The very notion of perpetually existing as a secondary figure, forever vying for attention and emotional resources against the child, was a prospect he found utterly unacceptable, an ultimate deal-breaker he was absolutely unwilling to compromise on. Consequently, Leo's entire dating life became rigidly circumscribed, meticulously defined by this singular, immutable boundary. This particular tenet served as a distinct characteristic, setting him apart from many of his male contemporaries. While a significant number of his friends, with varying degrees of success and emotional entanglement, embraced relationships with single mothers and became woven into the intricate, often challenging tapestries of complex family dynamics, Leo remained steadfastly firm in his conviction. His resolve was unyielding. He consistently, and without hesitation, rejected any woman who arrived with children from previous relationships, meticulously guarding his heart against the very situation that had once caused him such profound and enduring pain. He had built a fortress around his emotional vulnerability, and this particular rule was its most formidable, unbreachable wall. He frequently reaffirmed to himself that he simply harbored no desire to contend with the inevitable drama, the intricate emotional entanglements, and the myriad potential complications he associated with dating single mothers. His deeply entrenched belief was that his envisioned future, one of stability and unblemished happiness, could only be meticulously constructed with a partner who was entirely whole, somewhat unburdened by the perceived emotional baggage and pre-existing commitments of past relationships. He yearned for a clean slate, a shared beginning unmarred by the shadows of prior lives. Yet, with each resolute rejection, each carefully articulated refusal based on his rigid criteria, a subtle but pervasive sense of isolation began to creep into Leo's life, slowly tightening its grip. The pool of eligible women who fit his exacting standards, those without children, seemed to shrink with each passing year, becoming increasingly sparse and elusive. And when such women did appear, they often felt to him like a second-best option, somehow lacking the spark or depth he truly sought. A persistent, nagging doubt began to whisper at the edges of his consciousness, making him question if his expectations were, in fact, unreasonably high, perhaps even self-sabotaging. His idealized woman, a pristine vision of uncomplicated love, perpetually remained just beyond his grasp, a shimmering mirage on the horizon of his desires. As the inexorable march of years continued, Leo found himself increasingly enveloped by a gnawing frustration and a profound, aching loneliness. He observed, with a mixture of envy and wistfulness, as his friends progressed into the next stages of their lives, building families of their own, their homes filling with the joyful cacophony of children and the comforting routines of married life. Meanwhile, he remained stubbornly ensnared in a repetitive cycle of casual, superficial dating, utterly unwilling to compromise on his deeply held, albeit isolating, principles. Leo's unwavering faith in his carefully constructed boundaries, though undeniably forged and tempered by the searing heat of personal experience, had inadvertently rendered him emotionally marooned, prompting him to ponder the agonizing question of whether he would ever truly discover profound, reciprocal love. Could he, after countless years of deliberate rejection and self-imposed solitude, encounter a woman so exceptional, so utterly transformative, that she might finally challenge the very bedrock of his convictions and irrevocably alter his long-held views? Was his meticulously idealized vision of love and family, untainted by past complexities, truly an achievable dream, or merely an illusion he was destined to chase forever? And what might such a monumental shift cost him, should he ever find himself confronted by a love powerful enough to make him reconsider everything he believed? Or had he, in his relentless pursuit of an unblemished ideal, meticulously painted himself into an inescapable corner, a solitary space from which true, unburdened connection might forever elude him, One might naturally assume that Leo, stubbornly clinging to his deeply ingrained ideals, would persist in his diligent search for this elusive, flawless partner, his perfectly uncomplicated girlfriend, meticulously sifting through countless individuals in pursuit of that pristine, unburdened connection. Yet, as the intricate tapestry of life so often unexpectedly weaves, fate, with its characteristic penchant for irony, intervened in the most unanticipated and seemingly innocuous manner. It was one placid evening, the digital glow of his smartphone casting a cool luminescence across his face, that Leo found himself idly scrolling through the endless stream of updates on Facebook. His thumb paused, almost reflexively, upon a profile that, in an instant, seemed to crystallize every longing, every unspoken desire he had harbored for years. Her name was Iris, and with a captivating immediacy, she appeared to embody every desirable trait he had so patiently, yet fruitlessly, awaited. She exuded an infectious sense of fun, possessed an undeniable confidence that shimmered even through a static image, and perhaps most crucially, she projected an aura of alluring simplicity, utterly free from the perceived complexities he so ardently eschewed. Her profile picture, a vibrant tableau of genuine joy, depicted her radiant smile, framed by a lively gathering of friends amidst the convivial haze of a backyard barbecue. She conveyed the unequivocal impression of a woman untethered by emotional baggage, entirely at ease within her own skin, possessive of a clear understanding of her desires and aspirations. Her accompanying bio, refreshingly direct and devoid of pretense, succinctly stated her single status and her readiness to mingle with a guy who can keep up. Leo experienced no flicker of hesitation, no moment of internal debate. Something profoundly resonant in her forthright confidence and unvarnished honesty immediately clicked within him, resonating with a part of him he thought had grown dormant. And just like that, with the simple tap of a screen, their conversation began. In its initial, nascent stages, their burgeoning relationship felt effortlessly light, refreshingly easy. Casual, often playful, text messages gracefully morphed into longer, more intimate phone calls. They exchanged laughter-filled jokes, recounted amusing anecdotes from their daily lives, and slowly, cautiously, began to peel back the layers of their personal histories, sharing fragments of their innermost worlds, each revelation drawing them a little closer. The connection felt authentic, unforced, a stark contrast to the strained encounters of his past, making him wonder if he had finally, truly found the uncomplicated love he had always yearned for. Leo found himself genuinely captivated by Iris's refreshing transparency. She possessed an admirable lack of artifice, an unvarnished honesty that he found incredibly appealing. She was unequivocally upfront about her passions, her day-to-day interests, and the vibrant, unencumbered life she actively led. Her stated preference was for something light-hearted, nothing overly serious or demanding, simply a companion eager to embrace life's joys and shared experiences. This candid simplicity resonated deeply within Leo, offering a welcome balm after the labyrinthine complexities and emotional turbulence of his past romantic entanglements. It felt like a breath of fresh air, a clear, uncomplicated path forward. Their geographical separation, with Leo residing amidst the historic grandeur of Pennsylvania and Iris making her home in the expansive landscapes of Texas, presented a significant hurdle, yet one they initially refused to allow to define their burgeoning connection. However, the initial months, despite the digital intimacy, were undeniably laced with a simmering undercurrent of frustration, born from the persistent absence of tangible, in-person moments. Iris, in her communications, often reiterated her unwavering dedication to her academic pursuits, her studies consuming a substantial portion of her time and focus. While she unequivocally conveyed her interest in Leo, an interest he felt profoundly and reciprocated with growing intensity, she consistently deferred their planned meetings, pushing them further into an indistinct future. Her rationale was always clear: she needed to prioritize her educational trajectory, to meticulously secure her future, and to ensure that they weren't precipitously rushing into a commitment before the time was truly ripe. Initially, Leo's patience proved robust against the tyranny of distance. Their daily exchanges of messages became a cherished ritual, a constant thread weaving through their separate lives. When Iris's demanding schedule permitted, these brief digital conversations would unfurl into expansive, hours-long phone calls, intimate dialogues that bridged the miles, allowing them to delve deeper into each other's worlds, sharing vulnerabilities and aspirations under the cloak of night. Yet, after several months of this remote courtship, the stark, unyielding reality of their situation began to settle upon Leo with a chilling finality. A pressing question, unvoiced but ever present, began to echo in the quiet chambers of his mind. When would they ever truly meet? It became painfully, increasingly apparent that their profound, deeply felt connection, for all its emotional richness, was stagnating, failing to progress beyond the realm of pixels and sound waves. The absence of physical presence, the lack of shared physical spaces, threatened to ossify their relationship into a beautiful, yet ultimately unrealized, digital fantasy, leaving Leo to wonder if this was yet another form of the baggage he had so desperately tried to avoid, or something entirely different that he hadn't yet named. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, a palpable shift occurred in the dynamics of their protracted long-distance courtship, a subtle but significant change that rekindled a vibrant spark of hope within Leo. Iris, with a gradual unfolding, began to share increasingly intimate details of her life, granting him access to deeply personal facets of her world that she had previously kept carefully guarded. She started to confide in him about her most cherished aspirations, her persistent struggles, and most poignantly, her profound yearning to find a stable, genuinely reliable partner, a soulmate who could provide unwavering support and a sense of enduring security. This newfound openness, this raw vulnerability, resonated deeply with Leo, igniting a fervent belief that perhaps, just perhaps, their hearts were indeed beating in perfect synchronicity, truly aligned in their desires. He allowed himself to hope that he wasn't merely another fleeting acquaintance, or a casual diversion in her life. He dared to believe he was the one, the destined partner she had so earnestly described. His admiration for Iris blossomed into something far more profound and intricate, mirroring the exponential growth of his emotional and financial investment in her life. For an entire year, a span of time marked by both digital proximity and physical distance, Leo poured himself unreservedly into Iris's existence. His commitment was total, encompassing his financial resources, his profound emotional empathy, and his focused mental energy. He meticulously covered her bills without the slightest hesitation, swiftly stepping in to pay her rent whenever she faced financial shortfalls, and readily assisting her with countless smaller, day-to-day expenses, all fueled by an ardent desire to be her steadfast anchor, her unwavering support in every conceivable way. Iris, in turn, possessed a unique ability to make him feel utterly singular, the only man who truly saw her, who perceived the depths of her being beyond the surface. She shared with him her most ambitious dreams, her quiet anxieties, and the profound, often unexpected, loneliness that she frequently experienced despite being surrounded by friends and acquaintances. In reciprocation, Leo offered her an unshakable, unquestioning loyalty. His devotion was absolute. He never once permitted a shadow of doubt or suspicion to cloud his perception of her, trusting her implicitly with his heart, his hopes, and his meticulously constructed boundaries. His guard, once so formidable, had completely dissolved in the warmth of her confided intimacy. He believed in her with a fervent, almost absolute certainty, and in the burgeoning future they were seemingly co-creating. He stood ready to undertake any sacrifice, to surmount any obstacle, for her sake. In the meticulous architecture of his mind, he was assiduously constructing something profoundly real and enduring with Iris, a solid foundation built on shared intimacies and mutual support. Every aspect of their evolving connection, despite the physical miles that separated them, felt as though it was gracefully aligning, moving in a deeply reassuring, positive trajectory. Yet, despite this burgeoning conviction, subtle, unsettling gaps persisted in their narrative, like faint but persistent static on a clear channel. There always seemed to be an elaborate excuse, a convenient deferral, whenever Leo attempted to translate their digital intimacy into tangible, in-person encounters. When Leo, filled with hopeful anticipation, endeavored to arrange a visit, to finally bridge the physical chasm between them, an unforeseen obstacle inevitably materialized on Iris's end. Her responses, though always polite and seemingly regretful, followed a predictable pattern. "I'm completely swamped with schoolwork right now, Leo." Or, "I really need to focus on my career advancements. This is a critical time for my future." At the outset, Leo's empathy and understanding were boundless, his faith in her commitments unwavering. He accepted her explanations, convinced that her diligence was merely another facet of the admirable woman he adored. However, as the weeks bled into months, his well of patience, once seemingly inexhaustible, began to perceptibly dwindle. He had poured an immense volume of his emotional self, his financial resources, and his precious time into their connection, yet, after almost an entire year, they had still not exchanged a single, tangible glance, a single shared touch. A corrosive doubt, thin as a whisper initially, began to erode the edges of his trust. He started to question the authenticity of Iris's investment. Was she truly as committed as he was, or was she simply relishing the sustained attention, the comforting emotional validation, and the consistent financial support, all without any genuine intention of reciprocating in kind? His emotions for her were undeniably profound, agonizingly real, but he was increasingly plagued by the unsettling sensation that he only occupied a space in her life when it perfectly coincided with her convenience, a useful, comforting presence to be summoned at will. And so, with a heavy heart, a mind swirling with conjecture, and a desperate yearning for clarity, he resolved to unearth the truth, to definitively dispel the suffocating fog of doubt that now enveloped him. How, then, would he achieve this crucial, game-changing revelation? After months of distant promises, of postponements that felt like slow emotional torture, Leo concluded that the time for subtle approaches was over. It was time for a drastic, decisive measure. The stage was set for an unforeseen confrontation, a moment that promised either ultimate clarity or devastating heartbreak, and there was no turning back. He understood, with a sudden, forceful clarity, that he could no longer remain a passive observer in the narrative of his own life. He needed to seize the reins of the situation, to assert his unwavering feelings, and to etch the depth of his commitment into Iris's reality with an undeniable, in-person declaration. It was in this crucible of mounting frustration and desperate hope that a daring, almost audacious plan began to coalesce in his mind. He would surprise her for her upcoming birthday. His intention was unequivocally resolute. He would appear on her Texas doorstep unannounced, bearing not just gifts, but the weighty, palpable intention of transforming their distant, nebulous connection into a solidified, official relationship. He reasoned that only by his physical presence, by standing before her and directly conveying the sheer magnitude of his seriousness and the enduring depth of his commitment over the past year, could he truly penetrate the veil of their digital existence and make her understand the profound gravity of his intentions. With this momentous decision solidified, he meticulously booked a flight from his home in Pennsylvania to the distant expanse of Texas. The ticket was, by no means, an insignificant expense, a considerable dent in his savings, yet its cost felt utterly trivial in the face of what he believed was at stake. Leo knew, with an almost spiritual conviction, that this journey was an absolute imperative, a pivotal turning point that simply had to occur. He meticulously arranged for leave from his work, strategically utilizing his precious vacation days to facilitate this monumental moment. Every fiber of his being was dedicated to preparing for the trip, a meticulous planning that extended far beyond mere logistics. The anticipation, a potent elixir of hope and nervousness, was overwhelming, bubbling within him as he carefully packed his bag. His mind, a restless stage, endlessly rehearsed the heartfelt words he would utter, the tender gaze he would offer, when he finally stood before her, on the threshold of her home. He had even acquired the ring, a gleaming symbol of eternal promise that had quietly resided in the private chambers of his thoughts for months, a secret harbored for this very occasion. This, he believed, would be the quintessential moment. He would drop to one knee, extend the sparkling token of his devotion, and confidently, joyfully, propose marriage. And in the echo chamber of his hopeful heart, he fully expected her immediate, unequivocal affirmation. As the fated date drew inexorably closer, the intoxicating blend of excitement and trepidation built to an almost unbearable crescendo. a pressure cooker of emotions promising either unparalleled bliss or utter devastation. The stage was now set, the players in motion, for a revelation that would alter the course of lives, and the true nature of Iris's carefully constructed world was about to be laid bare. Leo's entire being vibrated with an almost unbearable impatience. He yearned to finally gaze upon her face, to feel the warmth of her embrace, and most ardently, to hear those precious words of affirmation that had echoed in the chambers of his heart for so long. His meticulously crafted plan was elegantly simple in its conception. He would arrive, unannounced and brimming with devotion, offer his proposal, and then, together, they would gracefully take the decisive next step towards the magnificent future he had so vividly constructed in his mind. He envisioned every detail with cinematic precision, the breathtaking expression on her face as she unlatched the door, the initial shock transforming into an overwhelming wave of joy when her eyes finally registered the gleaming ring held aloft in his hand. In the sanctuary of his imagination, the entire scene played out flawlessly, a sublime tableau of romantic perfection. But a chilling question, a sliver of ice in the warmth of his anticipation, lingered just beneath the surface. What arcane twist of fate, what unforeseen reality, lay in wait for him in the sun-drenched expanse of Texas? Would this truly culminate in the transcendent, perfect moment he had so tirelessly dreamt of, a fairy tale climax to a year of long-distance longing? Or, conversely, would his impeccably devised plan, his cherished vision of an unblemished future, brutally unravel and come crashing down around him the very instant his feet touched Texan soil? The answer, shrouded in the mists of the unknown, hung heavy in the air, a sword of Damocles suspended over his unsuspecting heart. The metallic behemoth of the aircraft finally descended, its massive wheels kissing the sun-baked tarmac of Texas with a gentle thud, and with that subtle impact, Leo's heart surged, a frantic drumbeat of pure, unadulterated excitement hammering against his ribs. He could barely contain the electric thrill, the overwhelming surge of anticipation that coursed through his veins, a potent mix of hope and profound nervousness. Every single aspect of this grand gesture, this pivotal turning point, had been meticulously planned, rehearsed down to the smallest, most intricate detail, a testament to his unwavering commitment and his profound belief in the future he was about to lay at her feet. The final act was poised to begin. The meticulously chosen engagement ring, its facets patiently awaiting the light, rested securely in his pocket, a comforting weight, while a vibrant bouquet of freshly cut flowers, carefully nestled in his carry-on bag, awaited its moment to be presented, ready to transform Iris's birthday into an absolutely unforgettable tableau of romance. This grand, perfect proposal, a culmination of months of meticulous planning and heartfelt anticipation, was finally upon him. Now, as he stepped off the cool, pressurized cabin into the warm, humid air of the Texan tarmac, each deliberate stride across the concrete runway brought him closer to the life he vividly imagined constructing alongside her. A future brimming with shared dreams and uncomplicated joy. Every beat of his heart resonated with the increasing proximity to the moment he had held sacred in his thoughts for so long. Iris, in the intricate tapestry of his mind, had always represented the quintessential dream woman, the one singular individual he had patiently, perhaps even naively, awaited. Her perceived warmth, her undeniable confidence, and the seemingly boundless simplicity she exuded appeared to offer everything Leo had ever diligently sought in a partner. No burdensome baggage, no intricate complications, merely the promise of pure, unadulterated, uncomplicated love. He readily acknowledged that there were certain facets of their relationship, certain unspoken details, that had remained unexplored, unarticulated in their long-distance exchanges. But in the overwhelming fervor of the present moment, those omissions seemed utterly inconsequential. His unwavering resolve was fixed. He would appear on her doorstep unannounced, orchestrate a breathtaking surprise, and, at long last, articulate the profound question that would irrevocably alter the course of both their lives. He would ask her to marry him. The sheer exhilaration of her complete ignorance regarding his imminent arrival merely amplified the thrilling anticipation, adding another layer of romantic suspense to his grand gesture. With a decisive wave, Leo hailed the waiting taxi, the yellow beacon cutting through the airport bustle, and provided the driver with Iris's address, his voice laced with an almost palpable tremor of excitement. The ensuing cab ride through the sprawling Texan landscape unfolded in a dizzying blur, the passing scenery dissolving into an indistinct background as his thoughts raced, a torrential cascade of vivid images and hopeful scenarios concerning the breathtaking surprise he was on the verge of springing upon her. He clutched the ring in his pocket, a silent promise, his mind entirely consumed by the imminent, life-altering confrontation that awaited him. He was minutes away from unraveling the truth, whether it be of blissful reciprocation or unimaginable heartbreak. The moment was almost here. He felt no tremor of hesitation, no shadow of doubt, only an intoxicating surge of pure, unadulterated excitement coursing through his veins. As the cab made its final turn onto the quiet, tree-lined street where Iris made her home, Leo's pulse quickened perceptibly, a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. He carried no premonition of the exact outcome once his knuckles connected with her door, but a profound readiness settled over him. This was it. This was the precise, pivotal juncture that promised to irrevocably alter the course of everything he knew, everything he had meticulously planned. Upon his arrival at the modest, yet impeccably maintained house, Leo's excitement peaked, reaching an all-time, almost unbearable high. The dwelling, devoid of any ostentatious extravagance, perfectly matched the understated, comfortable abode he had envisioned for Iris. Its warm, inviting facade seemed to whisper promises of domestic tranquility and shared happiness. He paused on the small porch for a poignant moment, allowing the humid Texan air to fill his lungs as he drew a deep, fortifying breath. With a quick, nervous adjustment of the vibrant bouquet clutched in his hand and a swift smoothing of his jacket, he braced himself. The moment, meticulously anticipated for so long, was finally upon him. His hand, steady yet trembling, extended to press the doorbell. The melodic chime echoed within the house, and in his pocket the small, velvet ring box felt like a brand, a burning ember of hope and expectation. The door swung inward with a soft creak, but the face that greeted him was not the one he had so vividly imagined. Standing on the threshold was a man, a complete stranger whose features held no recognition in Leo's memory. The man, equally caught off guard, mirrored Leo's own shock and bewilderment, his eyes widening in a silent gasp of surprise. A tense, uncomfortable silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions. Leo could feel the sudden, palpable shift in the atmosphere, an invisible pressure pressing down on them both. The air grew heavy, charged with an unsettling uncertainty, the pleasant scent of blooming jasmine from a nearby bush now tainted with an inexplicable unease. His voice, though slightly strained, managed to articulate the question that hung between them, cutting through the stunned silence like a knife. "I'm looking for Iris." The query, simple yet freighted with monumental consequence, left the air hanging, taut with unspoken implication, and the silence that followed felt like an eternity, promising a revelation that would shatter his meticulously crafted dreams. "She's my girl," Leo declared, his voice a remarkable facade of steadiness, though his thoughts spun in a whirlwind of mounting confusion and disbelief. The vibrant bouquet of flowers, now a stark contrast to the burgeoning dread, felt incongruous and heavy in his grip. "What in the world are you doing here?" he pressed, his gaze piercing. The stranger, his composure visibly rattled, seemed poised to respond, but before a single word could escape his lips, the sudden, boisterous sound of small feet reverberated from within the house. Two diminutive figures, radiating an innocent, boundless energy, came bounding toward the man. The older child, a bright-eyed girl whose youthful exuberance momentarily defied the unfolding tension, skidded to a halt and fixed her gaze upon Leo, her eyes wide with unadulterated curiosity. In that precise, agonizing instant, Leo's heart executed a terrifying, precipitous leap. There was an undeniable, almost startling familiarity in her features, a striking resemblance in the delicate curve of her jaw and the expressive shape of her face that mirrored Iris's with an uncanny, almost haunting precision. A cold dread, sharp and penetrating, began to spread through Leo's veins. His mind, now a frantic kaleidoscope of fractured thoughts, raced, attempting to piece together this utterly unforeseen puzzle. Who were these children? Could they possibly be? The man, J., sensing the irrevocable breach of a carefully guarded secret, a dam suddenly broken, remained silent for a long, heavy moment, the unspoken truth hanging palpably in the humid air between them. Then, with a composure that belied the escalating tension, he finally spoke, his voice calm, yet underscored by an inexplicable mix of resignation and something akin to quiet shame. "I'm Jay." He introduced himself, extending a hand that Leo found himself unable to take. "Iris's." The very air in the doorway seemed to crackle and distort as Jay finished his sentence, the two simple words echoing with the force of a thunderclap. "Iris's husband." The pronouncement hung heavy and immutable in the oppressive silence, and for a terrifying, elongated split second, time itself appeared to warp, to utterly freeze around Leo. The vibrant, sun-drenched world around him, the cheerful house, the distant chirp of a bird, the subtle scent of blooming jasmine, all blurred into an indistinct, swirling vortex. Iris had a husband? The incredulity of the thought slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. Leo stood utterly motionless on the porch, the forgotten bouquet still clutched tightly in his hand, its vibrant colors now mocking his shattered dreams. The small, velvet box containing the engagement ring, once a symbol of boundless hope, now felt like a leaden weight in his pocket, its existence momentarily eclipsed by the seismic shock of Jay's words. His mind, reeling, simply refused to assimilate the brutal reality of what he had just heard, struggling in vain to process the monumental, soul-crushing betrayal that had just been laid bare before him. The perfect future he had so painstakingly envisioned had not merely come crashing down, it had been incinerated, leaving behind only the ashes of deceit and a chilling uncertainty. Husband? Children? The brutal, undeniable reality slammed into Leo with the force of a physical blow, a devastating punch to the gut that stole his breath. He had been so meticulously, so painstakingly, led to believe that he was the singular man Iris was patiently awaiting, the exclusive confidant with whom she had shared countless intimate conversations for months on end. Every shared laugh, every vulnerable confession, every whispered dream had, in his mind, cemented his position as the one. But now, standing before him, radiating an undeniable sense of ownership, was a man who calmly, unequivocally, laid claim to the title of her husband. Jay, observing the raw, uncomprehending confusion etched across Leo's ashen face, offered a faint, almost melancholic smile. "Let's talk inside," he suggested, his voice imbued with a strange, almost apologetic deference as he stepped aside, gesturing for Leo to enter the threshold of the home that now seemed to mock his every assumption. As Leo mechanically crossed the threshold, a chaotic whirlwind of emotions assaulted him: disbelief, searing anger, and a profound, bone-deep sense of betrayal. The very foundations of everything he believed about Iris, about the carefully constructed future they were supposedly building together, instantaneously shattered into a million irreparable fragments. He had been so utterly convinced of the authenticity of their connection, so certain that they were forging something substantial and lasting. But now, standing in the unassuming entryway of this house, which felt less like a home and more like a stage for his personal undoing, the crushing weight of the deception settled upon him with an almost unbearable density. How could this possibly have happened? How, by some cruel twist of fate, had he arrived at this devastating precipice? These questions, sharp and relentless, hammered at the gates of his reeling mind. Leo was still reeling, every cell of his body vibrating with the aftershocks of the revelation, when Jay, with a quiet solemnity, led him further into the house, guiding him towards the living room. The two small children, their initial curiosity now replaced by an almost unnerving quietude, followed close behind, settling themselves with a solemn obedience nearby, their presence an undeniable, tangible testament to the shocking truth. From the deeper recesses of the house, a voice, unmistakably Iris's, drifted into the living room, her tones light, oblivious, and utterly unaware of the seismic shift that had just occurred at her front door. The sound, once so comforting and familiar, now grated on Leo's raw nerves, each syllable a cruel reminder of the elaborate charade that had been played out, leading him inexorably to this moment of devastating, life-altering confrontation. The air in the room grew thick with impending revelation, and Leo braced himself for the complete unraveling of his carefully constructed reality. A suffocating wave of despair washed over Leo as the chilling realization permeated his fractured consciousness. Iris was indeed within the walls of this very house, just beyond the arbitrary threshold of this cruel, elaborate illusion that had, for an entire year, deceptively masqueraded as his authentic life. Her oblivious voice, still echoing faintly from the deeper recesses of the home, now felt like a taunting whisper, a cruel echo of a trust utterly shattered. Jay, with a controlled, almost weary grace, settled into a chair directly opposite Leo, his posture rigid with an underlying tension that belied his outward calm. He offered no immediate words, allowing Leo a moment, an agonizing eternity, to grapple with the brutal, undeniable reality of the situation unfolding before him. Leo's mind, a chaotic maelstrom of conflicting emotions, struggled to shake the profound, sickening feeling that his entire recent existence had been built upon a foundation of lies. Iris, the woman he had so blindly adored, had withheld the most fundamental truths, meticulously weaving a web of deceit, every interaction a carefully crafted illusion designed to manipulate and mislead him. Jay, his voice measured yet imbued with a subtle, sharp edge, finally broke the unbearable silence. "I know this must be a profound shock to you," he began, his gaze unwavering. "But Iris, she simply wasn't ready to disclose everything. We, both of us, genuinely didn't want to cause you pain." The words, meant perhaps as an olive branch, felt like a fresh wound. Leo shook his head, a desperate, futile gesture as his brain struggled to fully process the monumental betrayal. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, his voice trembling now, a volatile cocktail of searing anger and stunned disbelief. The words came out in a torrent, raw and unfiltered. "I've been sending her money unfailingly. I've covered her bills, every single one. I've been there for her, Jay. For us." His eyes, burning with a mix of fury and anguish, then narrowed, fixing on Jay with accusatory intensity. "And you? You're the one pulling the strings behind this entire, elaborate deception, aren't you?" Jay's composure faltered, his expression shifting from detached calm to one of profound, almost painful embarrassment. He lowered his gaze, his voice softer, laden with a heavy mix of regret and self-reproach. "It wasn't supposed to escalate to this extent," he murmured, his words a hollow echo in the suddenly heavy room. "None of it was." But the admission, rather than assuaging Leo's fury, only ignited a deeper, more dangerous spark within him, a silent promise of retribution for the monumental lie that had consumed his past year. The silence that followed was not merely an absence of sound, but a pregnant pause before an inevitable, terrifying storm. "We, Iris and I," Jay began, his voice laced with a heavy, almost desperate cadence. "We've been entangled in a profoundly difficult situation, Leo. She was truly in need of assistance. She honestly didn't know how to extricate herself from it." He uttered the words with a raw, unsettling candor, as if confessing a shared plight. Leo, his mind still reeling from the cascading revelations, found himself unable to reconcile Jay's placid explanation with the brutal reality of his own deception. "Needed help?" he choked out, his voice hoarse with incredulity and simmering rage. "Is that truly what this was? How, in any twisted sense, does this elaborate charade resemble help?" Jay responded with a weary sigh, his hand rubbing the back of his neck, a gesture of profound discomfort. "I genuinely never intended for any of this to escalate to such an extreme," he admitted, his gaze falling to the floor. "But Iris, she was in a desperate bind. We both were, in different ways. She felt utterly trapped, unable to find a way out, so we just allowed it to continue." The sheer weight of Jay's confession, a torrent of implications and unspoken complicity, slammed into Leo with the force of a physical blow, akin to a ton of bricks collapsing upon him. Iris, the woman he had placed his unwavering trust in, the singular person for whom he had unreservedly sacrificed his time, his finances, and his emotional vulnerability. The extent of the betrayal was now unequivocally clear, leaving him adrift in a vast, cold ocean of deceit. What would Leo, a man whose entire worldview and future had just been decimated, do now, armed with the agonizing knowledge of this profound deception? With a visceral, primal roar of anguish and fury, Leo slammed the door shut behind him, the thunderous reverberation echoing through the serene suburban street and through the very core of the Willow home. He stumbled away from the house, his mind a chaotic maelstrom of confusion, disbelief, and a nascent, terrifying rage. He simply would not, wrap his head around the monstrous deceit he had just uncovered. Iris, the woman he had idealized, the woman he had believed was his destiny, was a married woman. And the two innocent children who had peered at him with curious eyes were her children, living under her roof, with her husband. The stark, unvarnified truth struck him like a physical blow, obliterating every fiber of his being. His world, once a vibrant landscape teeming with meticulous plans and cherished dreams for a shared future, had been utterly, irrevocably shattered in a single, devastating instant. His mind, now a furious whirlwind of questions, relentlessly battered him. How could he have been so catastrophically blind? How had he fallen prey to such an intricate, prolonged deception? The image of the ring, still burning a phantom hole in his pocket, now felt like an incandescent ember of mockery, a searing reminder of his foolish, misplaced hope. The pain was not merely emotional, it was a physical agony, a deep, burning ache that promised to fester and transform into something far more dangerous, something that would demand retribution. The pleasant suburban street, once a backdrop for a romantic surprise, now felt like the scene of a profound, personal disaster, and the path ahead, though unclear, felt irrevocably steeped in darkness. How had she orchestrated such a profound, elaborate deception with such chilling conviction? The question echoed relentlessly in the hollow chambers of Leo's mind. He had entrusted her with the very essence of himself, his precious, irreplaceable time, the raw vulnerability of his deepest emotions, and yes, a significant portion of his hard-earned money. He had been an utter, catastrophic fool, a dupe in a meticulously constructed charade. As he stumbled away from the house, the vibrant bouquet of flowers still clutched absurdly in his numb hand, a cruel mockery of his shattered romantic intentions. His heart felt like a leaden weight, dragging him down into the abyss of betrayal. Yet, amidst the crushing despair, a potent, unexpected thought, chilling in its clarity, pierced through the fog of his anguish. What if this horrifying revelation was merely the tip of a much larger, darker iceberg? It simply didn't make rational sense. The pieces didn't fit together with the devastating simplicity he had just witnessed. He had to know more. He needed to comprehend the full, terrifying depth of this intricate deception. His instincts, now raw and hypersensitized by the searing pain of his fresh wounds, screamed at him that the insidious web of lies spun by Iris and Jay extended far beyond the immediate, devastating truth he had just been confronted with. The world around him, once a landscape of hopeful possibilities, now felt like it was grotesquely tilting, threatening to collapse entirely, and he was desperate, utterly desperate, for answers, a lifeline in the swirling chaos. Without allowing himself the luxury of further deliberation, driven by a primal urge for truth, Leo veered sharply from the sidewalk and walked with purposeful, if unsteady, strides towards the nearest house. The street, bathed in the tranquil, deceptive glow of the late afternoon sun, was eerily quiet, the lengthening shadows stretching like skeletal fingers across the manicured lawns. His hand, still trembling slightly, rose to rap firmly on the door of the first neighbor's home he encountered. A woman, appearing to be in her early 50s, her face etched with a neutral expression that nevertheless held a spark of undisguised curiosity, slowly opened the door, her gaze falling upon the disheveled man with a crumpled bouquet in his hand. The weight of his questions, unasked but deeply felt, hung heavy in the air, poised to disrupt the quiet afternoon. "Hi, I'm Leo," he began, his voice, despite the internal maelstrom, surprisingly steady, though undeniably edged with a raw, burning frustration. He gestured vaguely towards the house he had just left. I'm just trying to figure out something, anything really, about Iris Willow and her husband, Jay." The woman, her expression shifting from neutral curiosity to a sharper, more focused intrigue, raised a single eyebrow. Her gaze, shrewd and assessing, flickered momentarily from Leo's tense, troubled face to the crumpled, forlorn bouquet still clutched tightly in his hand, a silent testament to his profound distress. You're looking for Iris and Jay? She asked, her voice low but piercingly direct. What exactly is it you want to know about them? A palpable note of caution, mingled with an undeniable spark of nosiness, laced her words. I was just hoping to find out a little about them, that's all. Leo replied, his voice carefully modulated, his words emerging slowly, as if he were meticulously testing the waters, gauging her potential reaction. Have they been married long? Are they a happy couple? The moment he uttered the question, the woman's demeanor shifted, subtly but definitively. She didn't appear shocked, not in the slightest. Instead, a look of weary resignation, of knowing much more than she let on, settled across her features. Her eyes darted quickly over her shoulder, a subconscious gesture, before she leaned out of her doorway slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, almost hushed whisper. Well, honey, let me tell you something, she began, her tone a stark contrast to the quiet suburban afternoon. I've lived on this street long enough to know when something just isn't quite right. Iris and Jay? They've been up to no good for a good while now. The words, heavy with implication, hung in the air, transforming the innocent street into a stage for a clandestine revelation, and Leo felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach, sensing the imminent unraveling of an even deeper, more disturbing truth. His heart hammered, ready for the storm. I've been privy to whispers, to rumors circulating about them for months now, the neighbor confided, her voice a low, gravelly current against the backdrop of the otherwise tranquil afternoon. Leo's chest tightened, a band of invisible iron clamping around his lungs, yet he forced himself to maintain an outward composure, a facade of calm. He desperately needed to hear every word, to comprehend the full, devastating extent of the deception that had ensnared him. Rumors, he repeated, the word barely a whisper, a mere exhalation of breath. What kind of rumors exactly? His gaze, fixed intently on the woman, pleaded for the unvarnished truth. She leaned in even closer, her eyes darting nervously across the quiet street before she spoke again, her voice now a hushed, urgent murmur. They've been playing a dangerous game, sweetie. And I don't mean a friendly one. The word around here, from those who've seen and heard things, is that they've been running some sort of elaborate scam, preying on unsuspecting men like you. A sharp, cynical edge entered her tone. Iris, bless her heart, she might seem sweet as pie, but she's got a whole arsenal of tricks up her sleeve. And Jay, well, he's no better, just a willing accomplice. I've heard from other neighbors, seen a few things myself, about how they've systematically been scamming men for money, manipulating them into providing financial support, all while stringing them along with false promises of love and a future that simply doesn't exist. It's a despicable, predatory scheme, and it's simply not right. They've got their hands in more pockets than you could possibly imagine, trust me. Leo's stomach violently churned, a sickening wave of nausea washing over him as her chilling words slowly, inexorably, sank into the very core of his being. The realization was not just that Iris had lied to him, had shattered his trust. It was the far more heinous, far more calculated truth. She had been perpetrating this cruel, systematic deception on multiple unsuspecting men. He was not unique in his suffering. He was merely another unwitting pawn in her elaborate, ruthless game, another pathetic fool who had fallen hook, line, and sinker for her carefully constructed lies and practiced charms. The bouquet of flowers, still crushed in his hand, now felt like a symbol of his utter humiliation, and a terrifying, cold fury began to simmer beneath the surface of his shock. The desire for answers transformed into an unquenchable thirst for something far more potent, justice. They're quite cunning, those two, the woman reiterated, her voice tinged with a blend of disgust and a reluctant admiration for their audacity, shaking her head slowly. I don't claim to know every sordid detail of their operation, but I do know, with absolute certainty, that they've been successfully getting away with this deception for a considerable while now. The calculated, almost artful way they string people along, weaving their intricate web of false promises. It's truly something to behold. And it's not just Iris pulling the strings, mind you. Jay's deeply implicated, a full partner in this charade. They've been unashamedly living off other men's money for what I'm convinced has been years now. I've seen the pattern, trust me. The woman's blunt, damning words landed squarely on Leo like a crushing blow, a brutal punch to the gut that stole his breath and left him reeling. He simply could not, would not, reconcile the chilling reality she presented with the idyllic, hopeful narrative he had so devoutly believed. Every intimate confession Iris had shared, every whispered dream of independence and a fresh start, every heartfelt assurance of her desire for a stable future with him, all of it was a meticulously constructed lie, a cruel, mocking mirage. She wasn't alone, struggling bravely against the odds. She wasn't patiently waiting solely for him. No, the horrifying truth was far more sinister. She had been mercilessly exploiting him, just as she had been callously preying upon a succession of other unwitting men, each caught in the same insidious trap. Leo's mind, a chaotic maelstrom of shock and betrayal, raced furiously as he desperately attempted to piece together the fragmented, horrifying evidence. He had been so utterly blinded by the depth of his feelings for Iris, so irrevocably convinced that they were diligently constructing something genuinely real and profound, that he had utterly failed to even entertain the faintest possibility that he was merely another unwitting victim in their elaborate, predatory scheme. The anger, a scorching, white-hot inferno, surged violently within him, a potent cocktail of indignation and agonizing pain. But beneath the searing heat of his rage, a colder, more dangerous emotion began to crystallize, something far more sinister and unyielding. It was a potent concoction of humiliation, a chilling sense of profound injustice, and an emerging, terrifying resolve that promised to rewrite the very definition of his character. The sweet scent of the flowers in his hand now seemed to turn acrid, a symbol of his shattered innocence, and the bitter seeds of revenge that were beginning to take root in his soul. The conversation, though brief, had fundamentally altered his trajectory, sending him hurtling down a path from which there might be no return. The world held its breath, unknowing. This was no mere superficial slight, no fleeting disappointment. This was a deeper, far more insidious wound, a searing betrayal that had pierced the very core of his being. He had squandered an entire, precious year of his life, a year marked by unwavering trust placed in the most undeserving of individuals. A full cycle of seasons, of countless hours, of profound emotional investment, of vital mental energy, all meticulously poured into a hollow vessel of deceit. It felt as though he had been brutally robbed, not merely of his financial contributions, substantial though they were, but of something infinitely more precious, something intangible yet fundamental, his innate belief in the transformative power of love, his unwavering faith in the bedrock of honesty, and most devastatingly, his cherished vision for a genuine, shared future with someone he could truly adore and respect. Iris, with her calculated charm and insidious lies, had irrevocably stolen that profound sense of hope from him, and in the swirling chaos of his shattered world, he harbored no certainty of how, or if, he could ever reclaim it. "Thank you," Leo finally uttered, the words feeling alien on his tongue, his voice a fractured whisper, stripped of its former confidence. He didn't linger, didn't ask any further questions, the truth already overwhelming. He simply turned, his movements stiff and mechanical, and walked away from the neighbor's porch, leaving the woman and her chilling revelations behind him. He walked, each step heavy and deliberate, his mind still reeling, a tempest of disbelief and agony, from the unvarnished truth that had just been handed to him like a poisoned chalice. As Leo distanced himself from the neighbor's house, his feet dragging, weighted down by the sheer gravity of his discovery, a disorienting realization struck him. He had absolutely no idea where he was going. His meticulously constructed life, his entire perceived future, had been violently upended, flipped upside down in a brutal matter of mere hours, and he found himself adrift, unable to grasp hold of anything solid, anything real amidst the wreckage. A dangerous anger, cold at first, began to simmer and then boil within him, transforming into a scorching inferno, his thoughts spinning in a furious, uncontrollable vortex. He had been so incredibly certain of his future with Iris, so utterly convinced that he was the destined man she truly wanted, the one who would finally bring stability and love into her life. The stark contrast between that beautiful illusion and the monstrous reality now threatened to consume him whole, pushing him to the precipice of an irreversible decision. What vengeance would his shattered heart demand? The world around him, once vibrant, now blurred into a canvas of his profound, simmering rage. But now, in this devastating instant, everything had irrevocably changed. Every carefully laid plan, every whispered hope, every shared intimacy, all lay in ruins. His fundamental trust in humanity had been utterly shattered, his inherent pride profoundly wounded, and his very sense of self-worth left in tattered fragments, barely recognizable. The neighbor's chilling words, laden with their grim implications, reverberated relentlessly in the echoing void of his mind as he mechanically retraced his steps, heading back towards the spot where he had caught the cab just hours before, a lifetime ago. Leo had been a fool, a pathetically gullible dupe. All of it, the substantial sums of money he had faithfully sent, the countless, irreplaceable hours of deep emotional investment, the boundless mental energy he had poured into their supposed connection, all of it was utterly meaningless now, reduced to ash by the inferno of deceit. Iris had played him, a cruel puppet master manipulating his genuine affection, and he couldn't even begin to fathom the true extent of the web she had woven. Was he the sole victim, or were there countless others? Leo couldn't help but wonder, a bitter taste in his mouth, just how many other unsuspecting men had been ensnared in Iris and Jay's insidious trap. He paused, standing motionless on the quiet street, his gaze fixed on the ordinary houses that now seemed to mock his extraordinary betrayal. A profound, agonizing self-reproach twisted in his gut. How could he have been so catastrophically blind? He had given everything he possessed, emotionally, financially, mentally, and this was the soul-crushing, humiliating result. He had been nothing more than a pawn in their cynical game, a disposable tool in their calculated scheme. The truth, stark and unyielding, slammed into him with a ferocity that transcended all previous blows. His pride, once a steadfast anchor, his dignity, a core tenet of his identity, it was all gone, evaporated in the acidic burn of manipulation. He had been expertly played, skillfully exploited, and he, in his blind trust and desperate hope, had allowed it all to happen. But now, armed with this devastating, irreversible knowledge, a cold, unyielding resolve began to harden in the deepest chambers of Leo's shattered heart. There was only one path left for him to tread, one inexorable course of action that would define his future, a future now irrevocably stained with the bitter desire for retribution. The gentle hum of the suburban afternoon suddenly felt sinister, a prelude to a storm. What, indeed, could that singular, unyielding imperative possibly be? A chilling, undefined purpose now began to coalesce in the shattered landscape of Leo's mind. What Leo, in his profound shock and dawning fury, remained utterly oblivious to was the full, intricate tapestry of deceit woven by Iris and Jay. The world Iris had so meticulously presented to him, a vibrant landscape of budding romance and personal struggle, wasn't merely a fabricated narrative designed for his benefit. No, it was a precarious structure, artfully erected upon a much deeper, more insidious foundation of desperation, cynical manipulation, and a profound, underlying fear. While Leo, in his earnest sincerity, had been pouring the entirety of his heart, his hopes, and his considerable resources into his relationship with Iris, naively believing in the promising future they were destined to forge together, he had absolutely no inkling that her husband, Jay Willow, was simultaneously navigating a treacherous existence defined by relentless struggle and the ever-looming specter of complete financial ruin. The stark truth was that Jay's life had not always been characterized by such profound precarity. Once, not so long ago, he had been a man imbued with a palpable sense of ambition, holding a respectable position in a small yet surprisingly successful logistics company nestled within the bustling, expansive metropolis of Houston. He commanded a decent, stable living, and for the first time in his adult life, a comforting sense of optimistic certainty had permeated his days. He genuinely felt that his life was charting a clear, positive trajectory. He enjoyed the security of a steady paycheck, the burgeoning joy of a growing family, and the profound contentment of a wife whom he wholeheartedly believed cherished him in return. The foundation seemed solid, the future bright. But the unpredictable, often merciless hand of fate, was about to deal Jay a series of crushing blows. Life, as he was about to discover, wasn't always kind or predictable. The first, devastating hit came swiftly and without warning, striking at the very core of his financial stability when he was unexpectedly, and brutally, laid off from his cherished position. The world he had carefully built began to tremble, and a quiet panic, though initially suppressed, started to take root. The company, caught in the throes of a brutal economic downturn, was undergoing a drastic transformation, downsizing, aggressively restructuring, and mercilessly slashing costs. In the blink of an eye, Jay found himself abruptly, bewilderingly, unceremoniously out of a job. The initial shock was a numbing, disorienting blow, rendering him almost incapable of thought or action. For weeks, he simply wouldn't, accept the harsh reality. How could this possibly happen to him? He had been an exemplary, undeniably loyal employee, consistently exceeding his targets, pouring his unwavering dedication into every task. But the cold, impersonal logic of corporate cuts held no regard for his steadfast loyalty, his diligent effort, or the profound personal impact of its decisions. As the weeks blurred into agonizing months, each passing day marked by unanswered phone calls and unopened emails, Jay's once robust sense of self-worth began to subtly, then rapidly, erode. His carefully accumulated savings, once a comforting buffer against unforeseen emergencies, started to dwindle at an alarming rate, consumed by the relentless demands of daily life. He dutifully sent out countless job applications, each one a desperate plea for stability, yet each met with the same crushing silence, never eliciting a single response. Iris, ever the pragmatic and outwardly optimistic partner, initially endeavored to maintain a facade of positivity, her encouraging words a fragile shield against the encroaching despair. But even she, with her sharp perceptiveness, could discern the undeniable, insidious strain beginning to manifest in Jay's demeanor, in the lines etched around his eyes, in the quiet slump of his shoulders. Jay, by nature, had always been a man of immense pride, fiercely independent and deeply reluctant to ever solicit assistance. However, the crushing, relentless pressure of providing for his beloved family, of being the sole, failing breadwinner, was swiftly becoming an unbearable weight, slowly suffocating his spirit. Their bills, a relentless tide, stacked higher with each passing day. The specter of eviction loomed large as rent became desperately overdue, the hum of their home's utilities threatened with imminent disconnection, and the relatively small pile of debts they had once accumulated now swelled into an insurmountable, terrifying mountain, casting a long, dark shadow over their precarious existence. They were drowning, and Jay, once so capable, felt utterly powerless to stem the tide. It wasn't long, tragically, before Jay, ensnared in the tightening coils of financial despair, began to make a series of compromises, seemingly minor decisions that, though appearing innocent and pragmatic at first glance, inexorably propelled him down an increasingly darker, more ethically dubious path. One particularly fraught evening, amidst the strained silence of their dinner table, Jay, his voice barely above a whisper, confessed to Iris a desperate proposition. He had been approached by an old friend, a man who boasted of a side hustle, a clandestine, lucrative venture that, his friend assured him, could swiftly pull them back from the precipice of ruin. The offer, stripped down to its chilling core, was horrifyingly simple: leverage Iris's undeniable charm and striking attractiveness to cultivate relationships with affluent men, specifically those actively seeking companionship, and then, with calculated precision, exploit their generosity for financial gain. The insidious premise was that Iris could skillfully lead these men on, stringing them along with artful promises of burgeoning affection and a shared future, and in return for this manufactured intimacy, they would unwittingly contribute to their mounting household bills. Jay, gripped by a desperate, almost visceral need to keep his family from completely capsizing, did not hesitate to agree. His immediate acquiescence, however, was swiftly followed by a crushing wave of self-loathing and pervasive guilt. He despised himself for ever suggesting such a reprehensible scheme, for implicating Iris, the woman he ostensibly loved, in something that felt profoundly, fundamentally wrong, a transgression against every moral fiber he possessed. Yet, at that desolate juncture, suffocating under the weight of their mounting debts and dwindling options. He simply could not envision any other viable escape route. What real choice did they have? He silently pleaded with himself. Iris, upon hearing the proposition, was initially consumed by a deep, agonizing hesitation, her conscience visibly torn. The idea of intentionally harming anyone, let alone systematically deceiving unsuspecting men who had no inkling of the elaborate charade being played out at their expense, filled her with a profound moral repugnance. The proposal was a corrosive poison, threatening to corrupt the very essence of their relationship and their individual moral compasses. But the shadow of financial ruin loomed large, a terrifying abyss that threatened to swallow them whole, and the desperate whispers of survival began to drown out the faint protests of her conscience. What would she choose? And what dark path would this decision force them both down? The answer promised to be irreversible, forever altering the fabric of their lives. But as the relentless, suffocating pressure mounted, and with the tangible, terrifying possibility of losing their cherished home, the very sanctuary of their family, hanging like a guillotine blade over their heads, Iris found herself confronting a bleak, stark landscape where no other viable options seemed to exist. Her love for Jay, a deep-seated and powerful force, burned fiercely within her, overriding the protests of her conscience. She yearned, with every fiber of her being, to protect her family, to keep their small, fragile unit intact, shielded from the encroaching darkness of destitution. Jay had explicitly asked for her help, placing the burden of their survival squarely on her shoulders, and despite the profound, gut-wrenching moral conflict that tore at her soul, Iris, with a heavy heart and a whispered prayer, agreed. She would embark on this treacherous path, she resolved. She would earn the money they desperately needed to survive, even if it meant sacrificing a significant, irreplaceable part of her own ethical self in the harrowing process. The insidious plan began cautiously, almost timidly, with just a few carefully orchestrated dinner dates with affluent men who, through a blend of genuine interest and a desire for companionship, proved willing to extend financial assistance. However, with the chilling efficiency of a parasitic organism, the scheme rapidly expanded, growing larger, more intricate, and alarmingly more elaborate. Jay, now fully immersed in his role as the architect of their deception, meticulously monitored every interaction from the discreet vantage point of the sidelines, a watchful puppeteer. His primary objective was to ensure that Iris consistently secured the necessary funds they required, all while deftly navigating the treacherous waters to avoid any form of detection or suspicion. Iris, in her moments of profound solitude, attempted to rationalize her actions, to construct a fragile, self-serving justification. She wasn't really harming anyone, she told herself, trying to soothe the burgeoning guilt. These men were lonely, perhaps even complicit in their own romantic fantasies. Yet, each time she received money from these unsuspecting benefactors, a tiny, irreplaceable piece of her soul chipped away, eroding her sense of self, leaving behind a hollow ache. She loved Jay with an undeniable intensity, but the corrosive weight of the incessant lies, the deliberate manipulation, and the crushing emotional toll of constantly inhabiting a double life, meticulously constructed and perpetually maintained, began to wear her down, slowly but relentlessly. The lines between right and wrong blurred, and the woman Leo thought he knew was slowly being consumed by the monstrous creation of their shared desperation. This treacherous path held more hidden depths than either of them could possibly fathom, promising a reckoning that would inevitably arrive. She yearned, with a profound and aching desperation, to cease the relentless charade, to simply stop the corrosive deception. Yet, with a cruel, inevitable regularity, each fresh financial crisis that assailed them, a looming eviction notice, a utility disconnection warning, the menacing demand for overdue payments, thrust her back into the very heart of the act. She found herself, against her own moral compass, sinking ever deeper into the suffocating, intricate web of deceit, each lie intertwining with the last, binding her more securely. By the time Leo, with his open heart and unwavering faith, entered the precarious landscape of their lives, Jay and Iris had, regrettably, perfected their dark routine. They had played this manipulative game before, with a cynical precision, skillfully reeling in unsuspecting men like Leo with an irresistible combination of Iris's carefully cultivated charm and artfully woven promises of affection, only to ruthlessly extract whatever financial support they could muster. And Leo, in his earnest sincerity, was tragically no different from those who had come before. His inherent kindness, his genuine generosity, and his profound capacity for trust unwittingly made him the perfect, vulnerable mark. Iris, in her moments of quiet self-reflection, had managed to convince herself that this reprehensible arrangement was merely a temporary, unavoidable evil, a fleeting detour from their moral path, and that its ignoble end would arrive soon enough. She desperately clung to the belief that they would eventually extricate themselves from this sordid enterprise. However, as Leo, with an unwavering devotion, continued to pour his heart, his emotional energy, and his hard-earned money into their fabricated relationship, a corrosive, gnawing guilt began to fester within Iris, growing more potent with each passing day. This guilt, now an unbearable weight on her conscience, compelled her to subtly, yet definitively, pull away from Leo. She began to push him off, to strategically maintain an emotional distance, keeping him perpetually at arm's length. Her excuses were always polished, always plausible. Her demanding, busy life, her unyielding focus on academic pursuits, her profound need for solitary time to figure things out. But deep within the recesses of her increasingly troubled soul, Iris knew, with a piercing clarity, that every single justification was a lie. The brutal, unvarnished truth was that she had become hopelessly entangled, a prisoner within the very mess she and Jay had so cynically created, and she possessed no clear idea of how to break free from its suffocating grip. The truth, now uncovered by Leo, promised a violent end to her carefully constructed deception, a reckoning she had desperately tried to avoid. And tragically, it was Jay, the architect of their shared deceit, who relentlessly propelled her to continue the manipulative game, his desperation outweighing any nascent moral qualms. Iris felt utterly powerless, incapable of escaping the suffocating coils of their arrangement. She was trapped, inextricably bound by the intricate web of lies she had meticulously woven and by the precarious, deceitful life she had constructed alongside Jay. But now, with Leo's unexpected arrival and the neighbor's damning revelations, it was too late. The meticulously guarded secret was out, brutally exposed for the world, or at least for Leo, to see. Leo's heart continued its frantic, irregular rhythm as the cab he had hastily booked pulled away from the neighbor's house, leaving the scene of his shattered dreams behind. His hands, though not chilled by the Texan air, trembled violently, not from cold, but from the searing, all-consuming anger that had erupted inside him like a sudden, devastating storm. The carefully constructed world he had so lovingly built in his mind, the future teeming with Iris, the cherished dreams of a loving marriage, the serene life he had envisioned sharing with her, had splintered into irreparable fragments in a single, catastrophic instant. He wasn't entirely sure how he had managed to extract himself from that house, or precisely how long he had stood there, frozen in a tableau of disbelief, as Jay, with a chillingly calm demeanor, had welcomed him in and then dropped the monumental bombshell. Iris wasn't just a woman he had been emotionally and financially caring for. She was a married woman, a mother to 2 young children, and most damningly, she had a husband who had been cynically pulling the strings of their elaborate charade the entire time. All of it, every cherished belief Leo had held about their relationship, every shared intimacy, every promise of affection, was a monstrous, meticulously crafted lie. The crushing weight of this realization left him gasping for emotional air. When he eventually alighted from the cab, he walked with a vacant, aimless stride down the street, no specific destination in mind, his internal compass utterly shattered. His rage, a dark and potent brew, began to solidify, twisting his pain into something dangerous, something that demanded a reckoning. The city around him, once a symbol of his future with Iris, now felt like a desolate, unforgiving landscape. What would he do with this overwhelming, corrosive anger? The answer, still unformed, promised a path toward irreversible consequences. His brain felt dense and sluggish, enveloped in a thick, disorienting fog, as if it struggled desperately to keep pace with the tumultuous maelstrom of his emotions. Every thought that dared to surface in his consciousness seemed sharper, more intensely vivid, almost incandescent, as if the searing pain of the betrayal had ignited a raging inferno within his very being. But this wasn't merely the hot, fleeting sting of anger anymore. It had transmuted into a raw, corrosive, and deeply unsettling fury. It was the kind of all-consuming rage that mercilessly pushed every other emotion, every rational thought, aside, leaving only its burning, singular focus. How could they possibly do this? His mind, a relentless, tormented loop, ceaselessly hammered at this unanswerable question. How could she, Iris, have gazed into his eyes, day after day, week after week, and spun such an elaborate, sustained web of lies for an entire year? He had poured everything into their connection, his unwavering emotional support, his crucial financial assistance, his absolute, unconditional loyalty. And this was the agonizing recompense she had offered him. This was the treacherous repayment they, as a callous, conspiring unit, had so cruelly exacted. His aimless steps, guided by an invisible, wounded current, eventually led him to a dilapidated, run-down motel perched precariously on the very edge of town. Its faded sign flickered erratically against the darkening sky, a visual metaphor for his shattered hopes. He didn't care where he went, or what transient action he took. All that mattered was that it was as far as humanly possible from that accursed house where the brutal, soul-destroying deception had been laid utterly bare. Leo needed absolute solitude. He needed to be isolated, to think, to meticulously process the monstrous reality that had just consumed his world. He mechanically checked into a nondescript room, not even bothering to inquire about the rate, the cost utterly irrelevant in his current state of profound anguish. All that truly mattered was the promise of a solitary bed to collapse onto, a quiet, contained space where the torrent of his thoughts could flood in, unobstructed and overwhelming. But there was no true escape, not from the searing pain, not from the echoing whispers of betrayal, and certainly not from the terrifying, nascent seeds of a vengeful plan that had begun to germinate in the desolate landscape of his shattered heart. The walls of the cheap motel room felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage, trapping him with his own burgeoning darkness. His mind, a relentless, tormented engine, kept racing, replaying the devastating scene with agonizing, cinematic precision, over and over again, the flicker of surprise, then perhaps alarm, on Iris's face as she belatedly caught sight of him, the unsettling, almost predatory coldness he now perceived in Jay's eyes, the innocent, carefree exuberance of the children running towards them. Utterly oblivious to the shattering drama unfolding at their very doorstep, their world still untouched by the monstrous deception. 4 hours that stretched into an eternity, Leo sat rigidly on the worn edge of the motel bed, his gaze fixed blankly on the peeling wallpaper, the incessant drone of the television in the background barely registering as a distant, meaningless hum. Every few minutes, his phone, a persistent harbinger of the outside world, buzzed with a flurry of notifications, urgent calls from work, concerned text messages from friends. But Leo, locked in his private hell, ignored them all, their existence utterly irrelevant. His eyes, heavy with unshed tears and burning with betrayal, kept drifting back, almost compulsively, to the cherished picture of Iris he had saved on his phone. In the image, she was radiant, smiling, a vision of carefree joy, just as she had appeared in the early, intoxicating days of their relationship, the way she had made him feel, the only one. This was the woman who had whispered sweet assurances into his ear, telling him he was profoundly special, that he was absolutely everything she needed, the missing piece of her soul. But now he possessed the brutal, unvarnified truth. He wasn't special at all. He was merely another expendable man, another pawn in her heartless game, expertly played and then discarded. His thoughts, fueled by the corrosive acid of betrayal, began to spiral into increasingly darker, more dangerous territory. A sick, twisted idea, insidious and compelling, began to take root in the desolate landscape of his mind. Why should he simply walk away from this profound injustice? Why should he leave everything behind, absorb the humiliation, and meekly move on like some kind of pathetic fool, allowing them to escape unpunished? The question, once a whisper, now grew into a roaring demand, pushing him towards a precipice from which there would be no return. The small motel room, once a temporary refuge, now felt like a crucible, forging a terrifying new resolve within him. No. A cold, unyielding certainty settled in Leo's heart. He was utterly, irrevocably done being the fool. He had been expertly played, mercilessly used, and cynically manipulated for well over a year, his genuine affection weaponized against him. And for what ultimate purpose? To be callously discarded, treated as nothing more than an expendable pawn in their depraved game? His blood, now a torrent of righteous indignation, boiled with a fury so intense it threatened to consume him whole just at the very thought of it. A dark, seductive question began to echo in the desolate chambers of his mind. What if there was a way to make them, Iris and Jay, feel the exact same searing, soul-crushing pain that was currently tearing him apart? The more Leo churned over this vengeful concept, the more the insidious idea consumed his every waking thought, a festering wound becoming a terrifying obsession. What if he refused to simply let this monumental injustice go unpunished? What if he undertook an act that would force them to profoundly regret ever crossing him, ever exploiting his trust? An act that would make them experience, with an agonizing reciprocity, precisely what he was feeling in that moment: the gut-wrenching betrayal, the crushing humiliation, the profound sense of being utterly violated. He could, he truly believed, make them suffer in the same excruciating manner they had made him suffer. He wasn't entirely sure of the precise nature of the act he would commit. The exact contours of his retribution remained nebulous, shrouded in the red haze of his rage. But one thing, one singular truth, was crystal clear: he was not just going to quietly leave Texas, his tail between his legs. He was not going to board a plane back to Pennsylvania, return to his ordinary life, and pretend that everything was perfectly okay, that his world hadn't just been annihilated. The more Leo dwelled on the calculated, callous way Iris had manipulated him, the more the outline of his dark plan began to solidify, sharp and terrifying. He had traveled all this considerable distance to Texas, his heart brimming with hope and love, intent on delivering a joyful surprise, on humbly proposing marriage. The irony, the sheer, bitter mockery of it all, fueled his escalating fury, pushing him closer to a decision from which there would be no return. The shadows in the cheap motel room seemed to lengthen, mirroring the encroaching darkness within his soul, a storm gathering on the horizon. What would he do? The answer, when it came, would irrevocably alter all their lives. He had endured all the arduous trouble, willingly undertaken the significant financial sacrifice, and poured the very essence of his emotional investment into their fabricated future. And this was the agonizing recompense she had offered him. This was the devastating reward he received for daring to love her with such unshakable faith. No. A resolute, icy determination settled deep within Leo's ravaged soul. He would not, under any circumstances, allow this profound, soul-crushing betrayal to go unpunished. His fingers instinctively clenched into rigid fists, the knuckles bone-white, as his mind raced through a dizzying array of possibilities, each one darker than the last. He needed to inflict upon them, Iris and Jay, the exact same searing, visceral pain he was currently enduring. He needed to make them pay, dearly, for the intricate tapestry of lies and deceit they had so callously woven together, ensnaring him within its suffocating threads. He hadn't yet formulated the precise details of his impending retribution. He wasn't entirely certain of the how he would achieve his goal, nor did he possess a clear, concrete vision of his immediate next move. But one chilling truth, cold and sharp as a honed blade, had crystallized in his shattered consciousness: he wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. And the intoxicating, dangerous thought of exacting revenge felt like the only potent elixir, the singular pathway that might offer him the elusive sense of closure his tormented soul so desperately craved. What Leo, consumed by his burgeoning rage in that desolate moment, remained utterly unaware of was the terrifying, unforeseen depths to which his anger would ultimately propel him. It wasn't merely the personal betrayal he had suffered, it was the calculated manipulation, the profound, public humiliation of being meticulously made a fool by those he had trusted implicitly. Every ticking minute that passed in the suffocating silence of that motel room served only to stoke the raging inferno within him, transforming his pain into a potent, destructive force. Leo abruptly rose from the bed, his movements jerky and agitated, and began to pace the confined space of the small motel room, a caged animal trapped by its own furious thoughts. His mind, now completely consumed by the dark, compelling idea of what he might do, churned with ominous possibilities. The night, once a time for rest, now promised to be a long, sleepless vigil, a forge for his terrifying intent. The final, irreversible chapter of this tragic story was about to begin, and the only question remaining was the scale of the devastation he would unleash. He remained uncertain of the exact execution of his burgeoning plan, unsure of the precise methods he would employ, or the ultimate, terrifying lengths to which he was prepared to go. But one immutable truth, cold and hard as steel, had solidified within him. He was no longer the forgiving, passive man who would simply let such a profound, soul-crushing betrayal slide into the annals of unspoken history. He had been meticulously used, brazenly lied to, and expertly played for a fool. And now, the scales of justice, in his raw and wounded mind, demanded balance. It was time for Iris and Jay to finally face the catastrophic consequences of their calculated deceit. What would Leo, consumed by the all-encompassing rage that now coursed through his veins like molten lead, ultimately undertake? What monumental sacrifices was he willing to make, what lines was he prepared to cross, to ensure that Iris and Jay experienced the very same agonizing, gut-wrenching pain that now tore at his own being? The answer, still veiled in the suffocating darkness of his fury, promised a future irrevocably stained by desperate actions. The digital clock on the motel room's bedside table now glowed 9 p.m., its red numbers a stark contrast to the tumultuous darkness within Leo. He had been relentlessly pacing the cramped confines of his motel room for what felt like an eternity, his mind a battlefield of warring emotions and vengeful schemes. His internal storm had been raging for hours, relentless and unforgiving. But tonight, precisely at this moment, it reached its catastrophic breaking point. After the brutal succession of everything that had transpired, his devastating discovery, the unraveling of Iris's meticulous lies, the profound, personal betrayal, he found himself utterly incapable of remaining still any longer, a coiled spring of unreleased fury. The potent, volatile emotions that had been simmering just beneath the surface for days, the incandescent fury, the crushing humiliation, the raw, wounded pride, had all converged, reaching an explosive, unbearable crescendo. He had already, irrevocably, made his decision. Leo was done with the quiet, simmering anger that had previously consumed him. He was done with being passive, done with allowing the toxic mixture of pain and rage to silently build up in his chest without translating into decisive, vengeful action. The calm before the storm had evaporated, leaving behind only the chilling certainty of impending retribution, and the air itself seemed to crackle with the dangerous energy of his resolve. The quiet of the Texas night was about to be profoundly, violently disrupted. The relentless thoughts churning within his mind had twisted and contorted into something far more sinister, something immeasurably worse than merely abandoning the scene of his profound betrayal. He needed to inflict upon them, Iris and Jay, the exact same searing, soul-crushing pain he was currently enduring. He needed them to viscerally comprehend what it was truly like to be systematically lied to be callously used, to be utterly and irrevocably betrayed. And in the dark, twisted landscape of his tormented imagination, there was only one terrifying, definitive way he could conceive of making them feel that existential agony. Without a moment of hesitation, without any further agonizing deliberation, Leo abruptly left the oppressive confines of his motel room. He crossed the street with a chilling, determined stride, heading directly towards a small, unassuming local convenience store, its fluorescent lights casting a harsh, indifferent glow. Once inside, his movements were precise, almost mechanical, devoid of any genuine emotion save for the icy resolve that now gripped him. He grabbed exactly what he needed, his hands steady despite the tempest raging within, a plastic container of gasoline, several cans of highly flammable lighter fluid, and a bundle of absorbent rags. He knew, with a terrifying clarity, precisely what he was about to do. It wasn't complicated, not in the slightest. He wasn't some master strategist, no expert in acts of destruction, but the inferno of rage that consumed him didn't require an intricate, sophisticated plan. He simply needed to witness them experience the profound devastation he had felt. He yearned to see their lives, their carefully constructed world, crumble and burn just as his own had. Every agonizing second spent within the sterile confines of that store only served to amplify his terrifying anticipation, sharpening his focus. Once he had secured his sinister supplies, Leo methodically made his way back to his waiting cab, his voice, though taut with suppressed fury, steady as he instructed the driver to take him directly to the Willow House. The ensuing cab ride felt like a disorienting blur, the passing world outside the window irrelevant. He didn't bother to look out, his vision entirely consumed by the infernal images of his impending retribution, a path from which there was no turning back, only the fiery abyss ahead. His eyes, burning with a cold, singular focus, remained fixed on the plastic gas can nestled between his feet, a tangible vessel of his escalating fury. Every thought, every fragment of consciousness in his mind, was utterly consumed by the image of that house, by the faces of Iris and Jay, by the monstrous betrayal they represented. By the time the cab finally pulled up to the curb, halting before the unassuming suburban home, Leo's heart was pounding a frantic, deafening rhythm against his ribs. The house stood there, outwardly quiet and still, shrouded in the deceptive tranquility of the night, as though nothing amiss had ever transpired within its walls. But Leo knew differently, acutely, painfully. To him, it had ceased to be a mere dwelling, it had transformed into a potent, agonizing symbol of every insidious wrong that had permeated his life for the past year. The brazen lies, the cynical manipulation, the multitude of broken promises. Everything, every ounce of his pain and rage, had inexorably led him to this singular, defining moment. He stepped out of the car, his hands trembling imperceptibly, a slight tremor that belied the unshakable, terrifying clarity of his resolve. The house was cloaked in darkness, its windows black voids, yet Leo felt no hesitation. He moved with a chilling alacrity, his steps deliberate, each footfall purposeful and unswerving. He harbored no intention of lingering, no space in his mind for self-doubt or second-guessing. This was it. The point of no return. He made his way directly to the rear of the house, where the shadows were deepest and fewer lights illuminated the property, affording him a cloak of near invisibility. With a steady, methodical hand, he uncapped the gasoline can and began to pour its volatile contents along the side of the house. The liquid spread with alarming swiftness, a dark, glistening stain pooling menacingly near the edges of the porch and the wooden walls, its pungent, chemical odor rising sharply in the night air. The deed was being done, each drip a testament to his shattered heart, each spreading puddle a promise of the inferno to come, a violent culmination of his long-simmering rage, and the world held its breath, unknowing. The acrid, unmistakably sharp and pungent scent of gasoline immediately assaulted his senses, filling his nostrils with its chemical sting, and in a strange, almost perverse way, it seemed to slice through the lingering fog in his mind, replacing confusion with a chilling clarity. Leo paused, standing utterly still for a heavy moment, his gaze fixed on the dark, glistening path he had meticulously created along the house's foundation. This structure, outwardly so unassuming, had become the quintessential target, the physical embodiment of a place where everything he had so blindly believed in, everything he had cherished, had been brutally ripped away from him. The cleansing, consuming fire, he reasoned with a grim satisfaction, would strip it all bare, would annihilate every vestige of the deceit, just as the devastating truth had already done to the very fabric of his life. There would be no more pretense, no more elaborate lies to sustain. The inferno, once unleashed, would simply complete the destructive work that the truth had already so mercilessly begun. With a deliberate, unhurried motion, he retrieved a rag from his bag, doused it liberally in lighter fluid, its own volatile fumes mingling with the gasoline, and then carefully placed it at the very end of the gasoline trail, a wick awaiting its fatal spark. He stepped back, a silhouette against the encroaching darkness, his heart thundering in his chest, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the night. Every fiber of his being was acutely aware that everything, irrevocably, was about to change. Without a flicker of hesitation, devoid of any second thought, Leo struck the match. The tiny flame, fragile yet potent, danced briefly in the darkness before he tossed it onto the saturated rag. The spark, initially minuscule, ignited with astonishing swiftness, sending a sudden, brilliant flash of light into the profound blackness of the night. Within mere seconds, the voracious flames eagerly seized upon the gasoline, surging and rushing along the entire side of the house in a terrifying, undulating wave of blistering heat and incandescent light. The fire roared to life, a hungry, living entity, its escalating symphony of crackles and hisses now the only sound in the universe, an inferno born of betrayal, an undeniable, destructive manifestation of Leo's shattered dreams, and a promise of widespread devastation to come. Leo stepped back, his eyes unblinking, fixed on the terrifying spectacle unfolding before him. He watched, with an almost chilling detachment, as the fire, a living, hungry entity, surged and spread, climbing relentlessly up the outer walls, greedily consuming the dry wood, shattering the windowpanes with explosive force, and systematically devouring every vestige of the life that had been so cunningly constructed and maintained within those walls. The inferno roared to life, a colossal, furious beast of light and heat, its crackling, devouring symphony filling the once silent night with an ominous, triumphant sound. Leo's chest tightened, a familiar pressure, yet conspicuously absent was any trace of fear. He felt nothing beyond a sick, profound satisfaction as the relentless flames continued their destructive march, spreading with an almost artistic cruelty. This wasn't merely a random blaze, it was his fire, a devastating, tangible manifestation of his fractured heart, his final, all-consuming act of vengeance. The house, now fully engulfed in a monstrous conflagration, became a towering beacon of destruction, the flames licking hungrily at the black canvas of the sky, casting a terrifying, orange-red glow that illuminated the entire, previously tranquil neighborhood. Leo stood utterly motionless, a lone, stark silhouette against the backdrop of the inferno, his gaze fixed with a cold, almost hypnotic detachment upon the burning structure. He registered no oppressive heat upon his skin. He felt no surge of panic, no urgent desire to flee. The entire world around him could have been collapsing into fiery chaos, and it would not have mattered in the slightest. All that held significance, all that truly registered in his profoundly disturbed mind, was the burning house, the people he knew to be trapped inside, and the entire, idyllic life they had so cruelly, so wantonly, stolen from him. But even as the fire continued its furious, unyielding rampage, transforming the home into a roaring pyre, a strange, hollow emptiness began to settle deep within Leo's chest. A chilling realization, like a shard of ice, pierced through the red haze of his rage. The fire, for all its destructive power, wasn't enough. It was never truly enough. The act of vengeance, so meticulously planned, so violently executed, left behind not the profound closure he had desperately craved, but a desolate void, a chilling premonition that the true depths of his anger and despair had yet to be plumbed. The flames, though consuming the physical embodiment of his betrayal, could not extinguish the burning embers of his pain, and a dangerous uncertainty about what would come next began to gnaw at the edges of his unraveling sanity. The fire blazed, but the quiet emptiness within Leo suggested a horror far greater, a journey into darkness from which there might be no return. What was next? The initial, fleeting satisfaction, the imagined sense of profound justice he had so vividly anticipated, began to rapidly wane, dissipating like smoke into the night air. In its place, a cold, deep, and utterly hollow feeling settled in his chest, an unsettling void that offered no solace. Was this truly the answer? A nagging doubt, a chilling whisper of regret, began to penetrate the fortress of his rage. Was this how he would ultimately deal with the devastating betrayal that had shattered his world? He had ostensibly achieved the vengeance he so desperately believed he needed, a visceral payback for his suffering. But now that the act was in full, terrifying motion, something profound and unsettling shifted within him, a subtle but significant reordering of his internal landscape. The fire, a voracious, untamed beast, was mercilessly consuming everything, their cherished house, the very foundation of their lives. Yet, as the towering flames reached ever higher, a horrifying realization dawned on Leo: the inferno was consuming something precious within him as well. Leo's mind, a turbulent sea of chaotic thoughts, had been racing ceaselessly ever since the first spark had ignited the gasoline. But now, the furious, all-consuming anger that had initially propelled him had begun to recede, replaced by something altogether different, something far darker and more profound. He had arrived at a new, terrifying decision, one that resonated with an eerie, unshakable finality. He wasn't running away. He wasn't going to hide, cower, or attempt to escape the monumental repercussions of what he had done. No. He needed to face the consequences, whatever they may be, with a grim, unwavering resolve. The truth, the brutal, unvarnished reality of his actions, had burned itself into his very soul just as surely as the voracious flames were now consuming the house behind him. The inferno that continued to rage within the Willow home, that total, devastating destruction, it was undeniably his doing, a direct consequence of his rage and despair. For a prolonged moment, he stood there, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the blazing inferno, watching the fire spread with a chilling, almost otherworldly detachment. But that detachment, like all illusions, was precarious, and beneath its surface, a new, terrifying emotion, perhaps regret, or fear, or something even more complex, was beginning to stir, promising a future far more complicated than simple vengeance. The silence around the roaring fire was broken only by the crackle and hiss of consumption, a prelude to the inevitable aftermath. He was not overwhelmed by any discernible wave of guilt, nor was there any tremor of fear that rippled through his tightly controlled demeanor. Instead, an eerie, almost unsettling calmness had settled upon him, a profound stillness that belied the inferno raging behind him and within. The house he had once envisioned as a sanctuary of burgeoning love and unwavering trust was now, tragically, merely another collapsing pile of rubble, consumed by the voracious flames. The fire, a colossal, untamed entity, illuminated the vast, dark expanse of the night sky, its crackling, roaring symphony tearing relentlessly through the doomed structure, reducing it to ashes and smoke. Yet Leo did not flinch, did not betray any emotion. He wasn't even visibly fazed by the apocalyptic scene. All that occupied his fractured mind was the monumental lie he had been unwittingly living, the profound, soul-crushing betrayal he had endured, and the calculated manipulation that had orchestrated his downfall. It had all, every agonizing step, inexorably led him to this cataclysmic moment. And now, as the wailing sirens of approaching fire trucks grew steadily louder, their urgent cries piercing the roar of the blaze, Leo knew, with an unshakable certainty, precisely what his final act would be. He wasn't going to flee into the anonymity of the night. He wasn't going to compound the gravity of his actions by attempting to evade justice. No. He had journeyed all the way to Texas, ostensibly to confront the truth of his relationship, and now he would face the far more severe, undeniable truth of what he had done. It was time for him to fully confront the profound consequences of his choices. With a quiet, almost serene resolve that masked the turmoil beneath, Leo deliberately turned his back on the inferno, stepping away from the consuming flames and back into the enveloping darkness of the night. The fire, now a roaring beast attended by others, was no longer his immediate concern. He had already accomplished what, in his twisted sense of justice, he believed he needed to do. Now, it was time to turn himself in. Leo did not hesitate. The path ahead was grim, but clear. He didn't need to think about it any longer. The decision was made, etched in fire and betrayal, and the final chapter of his violent saga was about to unfold. He had arrived in this distant state with a singular, compelling purpose, born of betrayal and pain, and now, with a grim determination, he would see it through to its ultimate, inevitable conclusion. With a quiet resolve, he walked directly to the nearest street corner, the scent of smoke still clinging faintly to his clothes. He raised a hand, hailing an approaching cab, and once inside, offered the driver a simple, unwavering command, his voice devoid of emotion. "Take me to the police station." The ride through the nocturnal streets of Texas felt like an agonizing eternity, each passing moment stretching into a distorted continuum. Yet Leo remained eerily calm, his gaze fixed on the blurred landscape flashing past the window, the city lights reflecting in his vacant eyes. His thoughts, though profoundly disturbed, were steady, almost placid, even as his heart accelerated with each passing second, a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. He had made his decision, a choice forged in the crucible of his suffering. There was no turning back now, no possibility of retraction. He wasn't entirely sure how the authorities would react to his impending confession, or the severity of the repercussions that awaited him, but Leo was not concerned with those external reactions. He had committed the act he felt compelled to commit, and now, with an almost stoic resignation, it was time to face the unvarnished truth of his deeds. When the cab finally pulled up outside the imposing, stoic facade of the police station, its exterior lit by the harsh, utilitarian glow of streetlights, Leo stepped out without a flicker of hesitation. He paid the driver, his movements precise and unhurried, and then walked directly through the illuminated entrance, crossing the threshold into a new, inescapable reality. The muffled buzz of the busy station within, the distant chatter of officers, the ringing of telephones, the rustle of paperwork, only served to amplify his profound sense of finality. He was not afraid. He was not nervous. In fact, Leo felt nothing at all, save for the cold, heavy, immutable weight of what he had done, a burden that now defined his very existence. He was merely a man standing before the consequences of his rage, and the silence he carried within him spoke volumes of the darkness he had unleashed. The officer stationed behind the front desk, engrossed in a stack of administrative paperwork, barely registered Leo's approach, his gaze remaining fixed on the documents spread before him. Leo stood patiently for a moment, waiting for acknowledgement, for a signal, for anything. Then, with a voice as calm and collected as his demeanor upon entering the bustling station, he spoke, the words echoing with chilling clarity. "I need to turn myself in. I set the Willow House on fire." The officer's head snapped up with a jolt, his expression undergoing an instantaneous transformation from casual indifference to stunned disbelief. His eyes, now wide and focused, met Leo's. "Excuse me?" he questioned, his voice laced with uncertainty, unsure if his ears had truly processed the gravity of what he had just heard. "I set the Willow House on fire," Leo repeated, his voice maintaining its steady cadence, yet now imbued with an undeniable, heavy weight of conviction. "I did it. My name is Leo Quinton, and I'm here to confess." The officer took an involuntary step back, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized Leo, his mind visibly scrambling to reconcile the man standing before him with the monstrous admission he had just made. After a long, drawn-out pause, a silence thick with tension and the low hum of the station, he finally spoke, his voice dropping to a low, cautious tone. "You're telling me you started the fire at the Willow House?" he asked, emphasizing the pronoun, trying to confirm the unbelievable. "Yes," Leo affirmed, his voice unshaken, devoid of any tremor of regret or fear. "I did. I went there. I'm the one who set the fire." The officer, clearly struggling to fully grasp the enormity of Leo's confession, nevertheless maintained his professional composure. After another brief, loaded beat, he gestured towards an empty chair, his hand indicating for Leo to sit down, the first step in a long, arduous process that had just irrevocably begun. The ordinary police station was about to become the stage for a dramatic, deeply disturbing revelation, and the quiet night was about to be profoundly disturbed by the echoes of a vengeful act. "All right, sit tight," the officer instructed, his voice still tinged with disbelief, yet now imbued with a professional resolve. "I'll get someone more equipped to talk to you." Leo mechanically sat down in the designated chair, but his eyes, heavy with the weight of his actions, remained fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor, a blank canvas for his turbulent thoughts. The minutes that followed stretched into an eternity, each tick of the clock echoing the frantic beat of his heart. His mind, an unforgiving loop, raced back to the burning house, to the faces of Iris and Jay, to the year-long tapestry of lies he had so blindly inhabited. Yet, even as the inferno raged, as the house crumbled into a pile of smoldering ashes, a profound, unsettling emptiness had settled within him, replacing the initial, fleeting satisfaction. Was this truly his new identity? He wondered with a chilling detachment. A man who had consumed everything, including himself, in the flames of a lie? What fate now awaited him? What future could possibly exist beyond this abyss? Finally, the door to the interrogation room opened, and another officer entered, a seasoned veteran whose graying hair and stern, etched expression spoke volumes of years spent navigating the complexities of human transgressions. He cast a sharp, appraising glance at Leo, then settled into the chair directly opposite him. "So, Leo," he began, his voice firm, unwavering, yet tinged with a subtle, almost paternal gravity. "You're admitting to arson. You understand the profound implications of such a confession, don't you?" Leo nodded, his gaze lifting momentarily to meet the officer's eyes, a silent acknowledgment of his comprehension. He knew exactly what it meant, the full, devastating weight of his admission. He had, in a single, destructive act, obliterated everything, not just the house, but a significant portion of his own future, his freedom, his very essence. His actions, born of betrayal and rage, carried immutable consequences. And now, with a quiet, somber resignation, it was time to confront them directly. "I understand," he affirmed, his voice barely a whisper, yet resonating with an undeniable sincerity. For the next several minutes, Leo, with an almost chilling composure, recounted his entire harrowing narrative, the intoxicating, then devastating, relationship with Iris, the soul-crushing betrayal he had suffered, the insidious web of lies woven by her and Jay, and how this cascading sequence of events had inexorably propelled him to this moment, to this fateful, irreversible act of destruction. Each word was a step closer to sealing his fate, each revelation a stark, unflinching truth laid bare. The detective listened intently, his expression a carefully neutral mask, occasionally interjecting with a precise, pointed question to clarify a detail, yet conspicuously devoid of any discernible judgment in his measured tone. He was simply listening, allowing Leo to unravel the intricate tapestry of his anguish and actions, to speak his unburdened truth. As Leo recounted his harrowing tale, a persistent, unsettling feeling gnawed at him, a chilling conviction that something profound and irreversible had been irrevocably broken within his very being, that he was fractured beyond any hope of repair. Yet, this raw, unfiltered confession, this stark admission of his deed, was all he had left. It was the only remaining avenue through which he could attempt to impose a semblance of order, a fragile sense of meaning, upon the profound chaos he had so violently unleashed. Then, as the conversation inevitably shifted, moving towards the grim specifics of the fire, the accelerants, the point of ignition, the timeline, Leo, with a sudden, chilling clarity, added a detail that made his stomach violently churn, a bitter taste rising in his throat. "I wasn't the only one," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, fraught with a mixture of self-loathing and vindication. "I wasn't the only man she did this to." He paused, swallowing hard, the implications of his next words heavy in the air. "Iris. Jay, they've been systematically preying out unsuspecting men like me for years. They've been running an elaborate, heartless scam, exploiting our trust, our affections, our finances. I wasn't the first, not by a long shot, but I am, unequivocally, the one who got caught, the one who broke." The detective's carefully constructed neutrality visibly wavered, his expression shifting, a flicker of genuine intrigue crossing his face. His pen, poised over his notepad, scratched out a swift notation. "You're saying you're not the only one?" he asked, his voice now imbued with a sharper, more focused intensity. Leo nodded, a grim affirmation. "No. I discovered today that there are others, numerous men, much like myself, who have been callously used, exploited, and ultimately discarded. I was merely another victim in their cruel, calculated scheme." Leo's confession, a dam finally bursting under immense pressure, had opened the floodgates, not just for his own story, but potentially for a far wider, more sinister investigation, threatening to expose a deeply buried network of deceit. The quiet interrogation room now crackled with the unsettling promise of a much larger scandal, a truth far more reaching than a single act of arson. The quiet, desperate rage of one man had ignited a fire that might now consume many. But with these startling new details now emerging, brought forth by Leo's raw, unvarnished confession, a multitude of unsettling questions lingered in the air, thick with uncertainty. What was destined to happen now, in the wake of such a cataclysmic act and its subsequent admission? Would Leo, the perpetrator of this fiery vengeance, face the full, unyielding force of justice for his destructive actions? Or, perhaps, would the profound, insidious truth of his involvement in something far grander, a predatory scheme extending beyond his personal pain, finally come to light, altering the entire narrative of the crime and its motives? The news, propelled by the sensational nature of the crime, spread with the speed and ferocity of wildfire across the nation. It became utterly impossible for Leo's family to remain oblivious, to ignore the escalating media frenzy. His name, once uttered with a distinct pride, synonymous with admiration and high regard within their tight-knit community, was now whispered in hushed tones, tinged with disbelief, profound horror, and an undeniable sense of shame. The inferno that had so violently torn through the Willow House had, predictably, seized headlines with an almost immediate, visceral grip. And very swiftly thereafter, it became the singular, sensational subject of every news outlet, dominating broadcasts and digital feeds alike. Yet, despite the escalating public discourse, Leo's family, sequestered in their distant, once peaceful lives, was utterly unprepared for the crushing, soul-annihilating revelation that was to follow, the stark, horrifying truth that their beloved son, their cherished brother, was the architect behind this entire, devastating tragedy. Leo's parents, who had always known him as an exceptionally calm, remarkably intelligent, and unfailingly composed young man, a beacon of rationality and considered thought, were struck into a profound, disorienting silence when the full, shocking weight of the news broke upon them. They simply wouldn't believe it. Their son, the very embodiment of measured thought, thoughtful deliberation, and unshakable composure, had been arrested, accused of the heinous act of setting a family home ablaze, wantonly destroying everything in its path. It wasn't merely the sheer destructive force of the fire itself that shook them to their very core. It was the chilling, unrecognizable transformation of the person behind it, the unraveling of the man they thought they knew. The comfortable, familiar world they had built around their son's sterling reputation had imploded, leaving behind only the cold, hard, inescapable reality of a monstrous crime and a profound, agonizing question mark over everything they believed. The family's silence was not merely an absence of sound, but the echoing void of shattered dreams and terrifying uncertainty. How, they agonized, could their son, the very individual who had consistently embodied the unwavering voice of reason and calm within their bustling family, the one who had never once raised his voice in anger, never betrayed a flicker of uncontrolled fury, possibly commit an act of such profound, devastating extremism? Leo's mother, a woman of quiet demeanor in her late 50s, sat hunched in their modestly furnished living room, her gnarled hands frantically twisting a worn dish towel, a futile attempt to channel the overwhelming chaos of her emotions as she grappled with the incomprehensible news. "He's always been so careful, so meticulous," she murmured, her voice a fragile, trembling whisper as she turned to her husband, her eyes pleading for an explanation. "So utterly calm. How, in God's name, could this have happened?" Her husband, Leo's father, a man usually unflappable, could only offer a helpless shake of his head, the crushing weight of the unknown rendering him utterly speechless. He, too, had consistently perceived Leo as the unyielding anchor of their family, the steadfast son who could always be relied upon, whose judgment was invariably sound. Leo had been the quiet, inherently kind-hearted son, the one who meticulously avoided trouble, who unfailingly adhered to the rules and expectations laid before him. The agonizing question now gnawed at them both: how had this peaceful, introspective young man, who had always exuded such an aura of rationality and control, fundamentally transformed into someone capable of orchestrating such a horrific act of violence? Their daughter, Leo's older sister, sat beside them, her face a mask of profound shock, utterly bereft of words. She stared blankly at the television screen, her eyes wide with disbelief, as a dispassionate news anchor meticulously recounted Leo's chilling confession, each word another agonizing stab to their collective heart. The comfortable, familiar world they had built around their son's sterling reputation had imploded, leaving behind only the cold, hard, inescapable reality of a monstrous crime and a profound, agonizing question mark over everything they believed. The family's silence was not merely an absence of sound, but the echoing void of shattered dreams and terrifying uncertainty, a testament to the fact that their son, the man they thought they knew, was gone, replaced by a stranger. Leo, in their formative years, had consistently been the steadfast protector, the unwavering guardian for his older sister. He had been the reliable presence who meticulously ensured her safety, who offered thoughtful counsel and sage advice during moments of uncertainty, and who provided comforting solace when the harsh realities of life presented insurmountable challenges. The agonizing question now gnawed at her, a relentless torment. How could this man, this stranger who shared her blood, her own brother, possibly have committed such an extreme, destructive act? The man she knew, the man who had shaped so much of her childhood, was utterly unrecognizable. Family members, understandably, were not the sole individuals grappling with the profound and disturbing transformation of Leo Quinton. Friends and former coworkers were equally, if not more, stunned by the revelation. Mr. Collins, Leo's long-standing boss at the modest tech company where Leo had diligently dedicated several years of his professional life, was among the very first individuals to publicly articulate his shock and disbelief in the chaotic aftermath of the news. Mr. Collins had consistently lauded Leo, showering him with praise for his exceptional work ethic, his unwavering dedication to his tasks, and his remarkably calm, unruffled demeanor under pressure. Leo, in his professional capacity, had never once exhibited anything less than exemplary professionalism. He had meticulously maintained a strict boundary between his personal and professional spheres, keeping his private life entirely separate, ensuring that no one, not a single colleague or supervisor, had ever harbored the slightest suspicion that anything was amiss in his world. Thus, when the shocking news broke, Mr. Collins, a man who had personally witnessed Leo's gentle nature and quiet integrity firsthand for years, found himself utterly unable to comprehend the unthinkable. His mind simply refused to reconcile the man he knew with the perpetrator of such a heinous crime. "It just doesn't make any sense at all," Mr. Collins stated, his voice laced with bewilderment and a profound sadness, during an interview with the local news. Leo. He was always so incredibly focused, so driven. The image of Leo, the calm, diligent employee, now clashed violently with the image of an arsonist, leaving a gaping, terrifying chasm in the perception of everyone who had known him. The profound impact of Leo's actions was now rippling outwards, shattering not just his own life, but the perceived certainties of all those connected to him, leaving a trail of questions and disbelief in its wake. He was an exceptional worker, utterly reliable, someone I could count on without question. Mr. Collins continued, his voice filled with a profound sense of loss and confusion. We often talked, not just about the intricacies of our work, but about life in general, about aspirations, about challenges, and I can honestly say, with absolute conviction, I never, not once, saw any inkling, any subtle sign, that something of this magnitude, something so utterly devastating, was even remotely possible. He was, without a doubt, one of the calmest, most collected individuals I have ever had the privilege of knowing. What, for God's sake, could have transpired to push him to such an extreme? Mr. Collins's bewildered words resonated deeply, echoing with an almost haunting familiarity in the minds of Leo's family, who wrestled with the exact same incomprehensible questions. How could the person they knew so intimately, the gentle man they had nurtured and raised, possibly be capable of such a drastic, destructive act? The collective interviews with Leo's friends and colleagues all painted a consistent, almost identical portrait. Leo was invariably described as steady, eminently rational, possessing an unwavering composure, and fundamentally not prone to volatile outbursts or irrational behavior. This stark, disturbing contrast begged the agonizing question, had the betrayal he suffered truly been that profound, that deeply cutting? Had the insidious web of lies and calculated manipulation woven by Iris and Jay been potent enough, corrosive enough, to not only breach Leo's formidable calm exterior but to utterly shatter his very sense of self, transforming him into a destructive force? Leo's family, reeling in the aftermath of their profound shock and disbelief, began a painful, introspective journey, meticulously reflecting on the tapestry of years that had ostensibly led up to this calamitous moment. His mother, her eyes distant with memory, recalled the days of his childhood, how he had always been a quiet, contemplative child, yet unfailingly dependable, a pillar of stability even then. He had been the natural caretaker, the one who instinctively looked out for others, the one who never made waves, who navigated life with an innate sense of harmony. The question, raw and agonizing, hung heavy in the air, a silent scream in their hearts. What, precisely, went wrong? Where did the path diverge so catastrophically? The comfortable, familiar narrative of their son's life had been violently ripped apart, leaving behind only fragments of confusion and a terrifying, unanswerable void, prompting them to wonder if they had ever truly known the man beneath the calm facade. The lingering question of his true motivation, the spark that ignited such rage, continued to haunt them. As the shocking and destructive reverberations of Leo's actions spread outwards, rippling through the stunned lives of his family and friends, the profound, agonizing emotional depth of his fateful decision began to crystallize with terrifying clarity. His initial betrayal, the insidious deceit perpetrated by Iris and Jay, had not merely destroyed his burgeoning relationship with Iris, it had, with a crushing finality, shattered the very essence of the person he once was, annihilating his former identity. The man who had, for a lifetime, been utterly devoid of any perceived threat, who had never once raised his voice in anger, who had never acted impulsively or irrationally, had, in a single, cataclysmic act, transformed into an individual capable of making an irreversible, devastating decision that would forever alter the course of multiple lives. Leo's actions, it became painfully evident, were not simply the volatile result of one isolated, uncontrollable moment of unbridled rage. No, they were the chilling, inevitable culmination of months of insidious emotional destruction, of being systematically exploited and profoundly betrayed in a manner that had, over time, rendered him utterly powerless, stripping away his agency and self-worth. The agonizing question now echoed with a haunting persistence. How could the profound, beautiful emotion of love, once so pure and hopeful, possibly transmute into something so terrifyingly destructive? How could trust, once given so freely, so completely, lead to such an unimaginable, ruinous outcome? His boundless love for Iris, his unwavering devotion to her, had acted as a blinding veil, obscuring the insidious truth of her deception. But now, in the desolate landscape of his shattered life, what remained of the man he once was? A man who had once been the very embodiment of calmness and steadfastness had, under the weight of an unbearable betrayal, transformed into someone capable of the unimaginable, of an act of violence that defied all previous understanding. The immense, crushing emotional toll of the betrayal was starkly, tragically evident in every facet of his desperate, destructive actions. He was, unequivocally, no longer the person he once was. He was a broken, vengeful shadow, a man utterly consumed by the inferno of his own making, and the aftermath would haunt everyone involved, stretching far beyond the smoldering ruins of a single house. His transformation was complete, and its consequences were just beginning to unfold. And now, as the meticulous wheels of the legal investigation began to grind forward, slowly but inexorably, Leo's shattered family was left adrift in a sea of agonizing uncertainty, constantly grappling with the profound question of what fate awaited him. Would he, their son and brother, face the full, unyielding weight of his actions within the unforgiving confines of the legal system, a system often blind to the complexities of human pain? Would anyone, a judge, a jury, even the public, believe his desperate plea that he, too, was a victim, manipulated and exploited by those he had so profoundly trusted? Or would the justice system, in its rigid interpretation of law, simply brand him as a dangerous criminal, a man who had irrevocably lost control of his emotions and, in a moment of desperate rage, had taken matters into his own destructive hands? The legal consequences, stark and inescapable, were now an inevitable reality. His raw, unvarnished confession had, in essence, sealed his immediate fate, guaranteeing his entanglement within the judicial process. Yet the long, arduous road ahead remained shrouded in a thick fog of ambiguity. Was there any glimmer of hope, any possibility, however faint, for redemption? Could Leo ever truly reclaim the essence of the calm, steady man he once was? Or had he, in that singular act of fiery vengeance, crossed an irreversible line, a moral chasm that could never be undone, forever altering the very fabric of his being? The answer, elusive and terrifying, hung heavy over their fractured lives. The courtroom, usually a crucible of legal theatrics, was now filled with a palpable, almost suffocating silence as the jury, their faces impassive, retired to deliberate Leo's fate. Every passing second dragged on, stretching the already taut tension to a near breaking point, each breath held in collective apprehension. The defense's meticulously constructed argument, presented with fervent conviction, revolved around a single, unyielding premise, a desperate attempt to frame the narrative. Leo Quinton, they asserted, had been pushed far beyond the limits of human endurance. The defense team painted a poignant, sympathetic portrait of Leo as a man utterly broken by an insidious, soul-destroying betrayal, a man who had been ruthlessly manipulated and systematically deceived by the conniving duo of Iris and Jay for well over a year. Their narrative sought to elicit empathy, to argue that his actions, however extreme, were the tragic, desperate outburst of a man utterly destroyed by profound injustice, rather than the calculated act of a hardened criminal. The jury's decision, imminent and life-altering, held the power to define Leo's future, and the silence in the courtroom was a testament to the weight of that impending judgment. What justice awaited him? The defense team, in a strategically calculated move, did not, and indeed could not, deny the undisputed fact that Leo had set the devastating fire. The irrefutable evidence, coupled with Leo's own confession, rendered such a denial utterly impossible. However, their primary contention, the very bedrock of their argument, was that the inferno had not been a cold-blooded, premeditated act of malice, born of a hardened criminal intent. No, they passionately asserted, it had been the tragic, visceral culmination of a broken heart, the desperate, explosive consequence of a man whose entire carefully constructed world, his very essence of being, had been utterly shattered in a single, excruciatingly painful moment of profound betrayal. Leo Quinton, his defense attorney began, his voice resonating with a carefully modulated blend of conviction and pathos in his impassioned closing arguments, was fundamentally not a man who acted on impulse, nor was he driven by malicious intent. He acted, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, out of an unfathomable depth of despair, out of a raw, searing belief that the woman he loved unconditionally, the woman he had placed his absolute trust in, had betrayed him in the most unforgivable, soul-destroying manner imaginable. This, I implore you, is not the story of a cold-blooded murderer. This is, unequivocally, the tragic chronicle of a man pushed far beyond his inherent breaking point, a man whose spirit was irrevocably crushed by the weight of deceit. And while we, as his defense, do not, and indeed cannot, excuse the destructive act of the fire itself, we earnestly ask you, the esteemed jury, to strive to understand the devastating emotional toll, the unbearable psychological torment, that inexorably led to this desperate, tragic act. In that singular, catastrophic moment of revelation, he truly lost everything that defined his world. The defense team did not shy away from the stark reality of Leo's confession. Quite the opposite, they strategically leaned into it, using his open admission as compelling evidence, not of guilt in the malicious sense, but of his profound remorse, his shattered psyche, and the utterly broken state he was in when he ignited the flames. His very honesty, they hoped, would serve to humanize him, transforming him from a villain into a tragic figure deserving of empathy. The fate of Leo, now resting in the hands of the jury, hung precariously in the balance, awaiting a verdict that would irrevocably shape his future, a future where redemption remained a distant, uncertain hope, and the ghost of his past, the betrayal, lingered. They artfully reframed Leo's decision to willingly turn himself into the authorities as a profound, albeit agonizing, act of accountability, the desperate move of a man who fully recognized he had catastrophically crossed an unalterable line and was now prepared to squarely face the immense consequences of his actions. Their impassioned argument asserted that Leo had never truly wanted this destructive outcome. He had never harbored a malicious desire to harm or destroy anyone. But the insidious layers of lies had steadily accumulated, the crushing weight of betrayal had piled ever higher, and in the end, the unbearable burden of it all had utterly crushed his spirit, obliterating his capacity for rational thought. The defense team earnestly implored the jury to meticulously consider the devastating psychological impact of such prolonged and cynical manipulation, of the years Leo had spent pouring his trust and affection into someone who was never genuinely present, never truly committed, merely a mirage of companionship. However, the prosecution, unswayed by the emotional appeals, perceived the situation through a starkly different lens. Their argument was relentlessly simple, yet unyielding in its demand: justice. They contended that Leo had not merely acted out of an uncontrollable, fleeting moment of blind rage. No, they insisted, he had made a conscious, deliberate decision, a calculated choice to unleash destruction. The prosecution meticulously painted Leo as a man who had allowed his personal pain to fester, to deepen and corrupt, until it had entirely consumed him, driving him to a vengeful act. While acknowledging the undeniable reality of his betrayal-induced suffering, the prosecution argued, with unwavering conviction, that such profound emotional distress, however legitimate, could never, under any circumstances, justify an act of such violent magnitude. "The law, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor stated, his voice ringing with firm authority and moral certitude, "does not and cannot excuse arson. The line between victim and perpetrator is clear, and Leo Quinton crossed it. The scales of justice, now heavily weighted, poised precariously, awaiting a decision that would define not just Leo's future, but the very interpretation of compassion versus culpability in the face of profound personal pain. The fate of Leo hung in the balance, a stark reminder of the unforgiving nature of the law. Regardless of the profound, tumultuous emotions Leo may have felt, regardless of the agonizing, soul-crushing betrayal he undeniably suffered, there exists no world, no civilized society, in which it is acceptable to take matters into your own hands in such a destructive, vengeful manner," the prosecutor declared, his voice resonating with an unyielding conviction, cutting through the emotional appeals of the defense. What Leo Quinton perpetrated was not merely a spontaneous, uncontrollable crime of passion born of a singular, fleeting moment of rage. It was, rather, a meticulously calculated decision, a deliberate act of vengeance. He made a conscious, terrifying choice to utterly destroy a family's sanctuary, their home, and by his reckless, egregious act, he callously endangered innocent lives, demonstrating a profound disregard for the consequences. We, as a society, cannot, and must not, permit emotional distress, however legitimate or intense, to become a convenient excuse for such unbridled violence. The integrity of our legal system, the very fabric of our civil order, demands that we uphold this principle. It is as simple, and as unyielding as that. The prosecutor's argument, stark and uncompromising, left no room for moral ambiguity. Leo, in their view, had crossed an unforgivable line. It mattered not, in the cold, objective eyes of the law, how deeply the betrayal had cut, nor how utterly shattered Leo's spirit felt. He had made a definitive, conscious choice, a choice to destroy everything in a blaze of anger. And now, with an inescapable certainty, he would face the full, unyielding consequences of that catastrophic decision. The tension in the courtroom, already stretched taut throughout the deliberation, reached an almost unbearable peak when the jury, their faces devoid of expression, was called back into the hallowed space. Leo sat motionless, a statue carved from anxiety and resignation, his hands clenched so tightly in his lap that his knuckles were bone-white. His eyes, fixed unswervingly ahead, betrayed a profound inner turmoil, yet his posture remained rigid. He had openly admitted to the heinous act he had committed. There was no denying the truth of his confession. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that the prosecution's case was formidably strong, built upon irrefutable facts and his own words. However, the defense, in their eloquent, impassioned plea, had, he hoped, managed to plant a tiny, insidious seed of doubt within the jury's collective consciousness, a fragile counter-narrative of a broken man driven to madness. The judge's voice, as he prepared to read the verdict, seemed to echo in the profound silence, holding Leo's entire future in its pronouncement. The air itself crackled with anticipation, poised on the knife-edge between despair and an almost impossible hope. Was Leo a mere victim of truly exceptional, harrowing circumstance, a man tragically caught in an inescapable web of deceit, pushed far beyond the limits of his psychological endurance by the very woman he had so profoundly, so naively, loved? Or was he, fundamentally, simply an individual who had irrevocably lost control, someone who had allowed his raw, untamed emotions to seize the reins and dictate his destructive actions, regardless of the precipitating factors? These profound, morally complex questions undoubtedly weighed heavily upon the jury. The jury's deliberation, a grueling process shrouded in secrecy, lasted for what felt like an eternity, stretching for hours behind closed doors, the air in the silent courtroom growing thick and heavy with an almost unbearable anticipation. When the foreman finally stood, his face unreadable, his stance solemn, the decision, momentous and life-altering, had been unequivocally made. His voice, clear and resonant, cut through the profound silence. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Leo Quinton, guilty of arson, destruction of property, and the intentional endangerment of lives. The defendant will serve a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." Leo heard the words, each syllable ringing with a chilling finality, yet it was as though they didn't quite register immediately, suspended in the space between utterance and comprehension. His body felt impossibly heavy, a leaden weight, as if the very ground beneath him had suddenly given way, plunging him into an abyss. He had, in a detached corner of his mind, been bracing himself for this devastating outcome, preparing for the worst, but hearing the verdict pronounced aloud, articulated in such stark, unequivocal terms, transformed it from a grim possibility into an irrefutable, crushing reality. He wasn't merely a man who had made a catastrophic mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. He was now a convicted criminal, irrevocably labeled, a man whose destructive actions had annihilated lives and whose own liberty had been extinguished, never to be allowed to leave the cold, unforgiving confines of the prison system. The immense, suffocating weight of the verdict settled upon Leo like a heavy, inescapable shroud, extinguishing any lingering spark of hope, sealing his fate in an act of profound and irreversible finality. The once bright future he had envisioned was now replaced by the endless, desolate expanse of a life behind bars. His transformation, from victim to perpetrator, was complete, and its consequences were absolute. His future was now irrevocably sealed, etched in the stark, unyielding pronouncement of the law. He would never again gaze upon the vast, open expanse of the outside world, never again feel the sun on his face without the intercession of bars, never again breathe free air. The life he had known, a vibrant tapestry woven with threads of possibility, ambition, and hope, was utterly, irrevocably gone. In its place stretched a cold, lifeless future, defined by the unforgiving geometry of concrete walls, the chilling clatter of iron bars, and the suffocating monotony of incarceration. The judge, his voice echoing with a weary finality, called for order in the courtroom as the devastating sentence was delivered. Leo's eyes, devoid of any light, never once lifted from the scuffed, impersonal floor, his gaze fixed on nothingness. Behind him, his family remained seated, rigid with a shock so profound it bordered on catatonia. His mother's face was an ashen mask, her eyes clouded with an uncomprehending disbelief that defied all reason. His father's eyes were vacant, distant, like two empty wells, as if the very essence of life had been painstakingly drained from him in that singular, crushing moment. His sister, struggling valiantly to maintain a semblance of composure, discreetly, yet relentlessly, wiped away the cascade of tears that streamed down her face, her features twisted in a raw contortion of confusion, grief, and agonizing hurt. As the courtroom slowly began to empty, the hushed whispers of the departing spectators started, growing into a low, pervasive hum. Outside, the clamor of the media grew, reporters swarming around the courthouse doors, cameras flashing incessantly, their hungry lenses eager for any scrap of information, any fresh angle on the unfolding tragedy. But Leo remained utterly motionless, his body stiff, frozen in a tableau of resigned despair, as he was finally led away, the cold glint of handcuffs binding his wrists. Leo Quinton's harrowing story stands as a stark, chilling testament to the intoxicating allure of love, the insidious, corrosive power of deception, and the catastrophic, destructive force of profound, unforgivable betrayal. But in the final, agonizing reckoning, he paid the ultimate, irreversible price, sacrificing his freedom, his future, and his very identity, all for the fatal error of trusting the wrong person, a decision that transformed him from a man of hope into an architect of ruin, whose personal inferno consumed not just the house, but every vestige of the life he once knew. The chilling silence that followed his departure was not merely an absence of sound, but the echoing void of shattered lives and a terrifying, unchangeable fate. His fate unequivocally sealed, the all-consuming fire of his rage had, in the end, tragically consumed him. The idyllic family he once so vividly dreamed of building, a sanctuary of love and trust, was now irretrievably lost forever, dissolved into the smoke and ashes of his destructive act. His life, once brimming with an expansive tapestry of possibility, promise, and burgeoning hope, was now brutally reduced to nothing more than the cold, unyielding confines of a prison cell, a stark monument to his catastrophic choices. Did Leo, the man broken by betrayal, truly deserve this grim, unforgiving fate? Was his incandescent rage, the inferno that drove him to such an extreme act, entirely justified by the profound, soul-annihilating deception he endured? Or was he, ultimately, simply an individual overwhelmed by the sheer, unbridled force of his own emotions, a man who, in his despair, allowed his pain to dictate a path of irreversible destruction? The profound questions linger, haunting and complex. Would you, faced with such monumental betrayal, have succumbed to the same corrosive forces, acting with the same desperate, fiery resolve in his shoes? Or, in the face of such overwhelming injustice, was there another path, a different way to seek resolution without sacrificing one's own freedom and humanity? The chilling echoes of his actions, and the profound questions they raise, promise to resonate long after the flames have died, casting long shadows over the concepts of justice, vengeance, and the limits of human endurance.